I uncovered my wife's affair through DNA testing, leading to divorce and a new chapter in life. My daughter, 18, and I watched as my wife and boss, Chastity, 25, loaded her suitcases into his car. He came to pick her up Sunday morning for a Monday meeting in New York. They needed to fly out that evening for meetings before mediation. Chastity, still attractive at 44 after 25 years of marriage, stood at 5 feet 7 inches, with black hair and emerald eyes. Despite gaining a few pounds over time, she remained slim with curves in all the right places. We married right after high school, and I worked to put her through university while studying online. Childbirth hadn't altered her appearance, and after law school we moved back to be closer to family. Already with 2 children, Julie was born in her first year of law practice. I faced him with mixed emotions, disliking his smirk and self-assured demeanor. Though tempted to confront him, I held back, knowing he wasn't worth the trouble. He and the woman with him were headed to settle a civil case. Unbeknownst to them, I was aware of their alternate plans. A call from a stranger named Louise tipped me off. They declined our offer for a ride to the airport, opting for convenience with Michael's car. It frustrated me not knowing when they'd return. Physically, we were evenly matched, with only slight differences in height and age. Despite his attractiveness, I was prepared for an equal confrontation. My daughter, Julie, sensed my thoughts and blocked me from confronting him, wisely protecting me from making a scene. We waved goodbye from the porch while Chastity likely anticipated exciting times with her colleague, Michael, in the city. Chastity's rise to associate partner at the firm 2 years ago changed our lives, and not for the better, as power seemed to affect her negatively, a fact known only to me. Louise, Michael's wife, reached out with details of his past affairs with subordinates, claiming this would be his last betrayal. They set a trap for him, and once his car disappeared, Julie and I retreated indoors. "Does Mom have any clue about what we know, Dad?" Julie asked. "That Michael's just looking to add her to his list?" "Probably not," I replied. "She's always been blind to the truth, even with her legal mind. Rumors about Michael didn't faze her. She never took gossip seriously. She's naive, thinking she won't get caught. To her, it's just a thrilling escape from our mundane life. It'll hit her hard when she realizes she's just another conquest for him," I continued, "and worse when she faces the consequences." Julie regarded me seriously. "Why didn't you intervene if you knew?" "You know, Mom," I said. "If I warned her against an affair, she'd brush it off as jealousy. It'd just lead to a pointless argument. Once she sets on something, nothing can change her mind." "Does his wife know?" Julie asked. "Yeah, and her father too," I replied. "They're ready to catch them in the act. This isn't his first rodeo. Louise knows about his past affairs. Her kids are grown, so she's ready to end the charade of their marriage." "Will you forgive Mom?" Julie asked anxiously. "Not this time," I said. "I forgave her once, but now it's different. It's time to move on." Divorce was on the cards the moment she left. The image of my daughter's shocked face will stick with me forever, as she, like our other children, never knew. Discovering her mother's past infidelity must have been a huge blow. "Dad, you have to explain," Julie urged. "I don't get it." "You're the youngest, Julie, so keep this between us," I replied. "Before you were born, your mother cheated until she was visibly pregnant. If you weren't mine, I would have left. Luckily, a paternity test proved you're mine." Julie's astonishment was evident. This family secret was known to only 3 of us, kept for the family's sake. "Who is he? Do we know him?" Julie asked. "It's been 18 years since I spoke to him," I said. "Your kids call him Uncle Charles." Julie absorbed the revelation. Her father always avoided events with Charles. Her grandparents split Christmas between them and Charles. Now it all made sense why her father distanced himself from her uncle. "Suggesting you text Uncle about Chastity's return in their hotel could stir up old connections," I quipped to Julie. I headed to the kitchen, brewing coffee with the local paper in hand, scanning for rentals and purchases. With Julie in university, Chastity could stay until she graduated. I needed to move before her return, knowing Judge McDonald prioritized children's needs, often leaving parents disgruntled. Julie's phone rang. She spoke quietly for a while. "Uncle Charles confessed to the scheme," she informed me later. "He sympathizes with you and wants to talk." After 18 years, I realized it might be time to hear my brother's perspective. Chastity's actions prompted me to reassess the past. Though I felt betrayed, I remained in the marriage for the children's sake, wanting to avoid a divided home. I grabbed a bottle of Jack and asked Julie to drive me somewhere. He awaited me at our old fishing spot on our father's property. As we shared the bottle, he recounted his side. It contradicted Chastity's narrative, leading me to believe the truth lay between them. Ultimately, the truth no longer mattered. His acceptance of responsibility was reassuring. I now shifted more blame onto my wife, considering Charles more of a follower than a leader throughout his life. While intoxicated, our father discovered us. Seeing our fire, he approached with a weapon, thinking we were local teens. He escorted us back to the farmhouse in Charles's truck. Mom cooked eggs and potatoes to help us sober up, a familiar scene from our youth. As we ate, Mom called Julie and Charles's wife. By the time they arrived, we were sobering up, Mary having married Charles. Post-separation looked bewildered seeing us together. "Okay, you're reconciled," Mary said. "After all this time, we deserve to know what caused the split." I began to speak, but Charles nudged me, a familiar gesture from childhood, signaling me to stay silent. He was always better at spinning tales to get us out of trouble. But this time, I was wrong. Chastity and I, Charles confessed, had an affair while she was pregnant with Julie. It was my fault, being immature and stupid. My younger brother, more mature, caught us, and since then, he's seen me as dead to him. Hearing the truth behind our rift, Dad exclaimed, "Damn, if I were Clint, I'd eliminate you." "What made you spill the beans?" Mom inquired. Chastity flew to New York with her boss, I explained. They booked only one hotel room for the entire stay, raising suspicions. Louise, Michael's wife, has private investigators on them. Julie knows about their plans, making it hard for her to see her mother's anticipation. Now she understands my actions. "I should have let you confront him, Dad," my daughter said, locking eyes with me. There was silence, so I continued. "Since Chastity gets to keep the house while Julie's in university, I need to find a new place before she returns." "Dad, I won't stay with Mom," Julie asserted. "Where you go, I go. We'll stick together." Julie was resolute, much like me, meaning what she said regardless of the consequences. "Julie, come upstairs with me," Mom requested, and they disappeared for a while. When they returned, they decided we'd move in with them for now. We only needed our clothes. On the way home, Julie admonished me, saying, "You need to stop defending Mom." We're adults now. She knew what she was doing in New York with Michael, thinking she wouldn't get caught. That speaks volumes about her opinion of us. Upon returning home Monday night, we began slowly moving our belongings. Each of us took our favorite items, TVs, my rocking chair, and her makeup table with mirror. Chastity kept us updated throughout the week on the progress, which was slow. Louise called, suggesting we finally meet on Thursday night at Logan's Roadhouse around 8. I arrived in work attire without a tie, spotting her by her white scarf and introducing myself. She was strikingly beautiful, several years younger than me, with long blonde hair, soft blue eyes, and a slender, conservatively dressed figure. Learning she was 10 years younger and a kindergarten teacher explained her attire. I, on the other hand, worked as an HR manager at a nursing home. Louise revealed they'd be in New York for the weekend, having completed 70% of the settlement work. They'd be served with legal papers upon their return, prompting Louise to ask how I was coping. I mentioned this time was much better. We discussed it openly, unlike last time when it was unintentional. My older brother was the first over 18 years ago before my youngest child was born. We hadn't spoken for 18 years until we made peace last Sunday, prompted by my daughter Julie. She made us work as we did in our youth, resulting in the worst hangover I've had in years. Louise chuckled and I added, "What made it worse was our father catching us like prepubescent teens and dragging us home." Louise found it amusing, but remarked on the comfort of being with parents. I informed her that my youngest daughter and I would stay with my parents temporarily, taking only essential items. I plan to keep Chaz's number active until Sunday, then block her forever. Before parting ways, Louise and I danced at a nearby bar. Despite everything, I returned home in good spirits to be questioned by my daughter Julie, who seemed to know everything. The following day, as we prepared for the day, Julie kept teasing me with, "Daddy's got a new girlfriend." We had a great Sunday dinner, and my parents were already comfortable. It was special for my mother to cook for us again, and she was happy. We all ate well, with little left over. At 1 a.m., a call startled me awake. Louise confirmed they were asleep when the hotel detective entered, with the whole event filmed by cams. She sent me a temporary copy of the video. I got up, dressed, and went downstairs to make tea. My mother joined me as I finished making a cup. "Is the water still hot?" she inquired. I rose to prepare her some tea. As I showed her the video I just received on my phone, I observed my mother's changing expression. Chastity and Michael were captured undressed under the sheets, their shocked voices evident. They appeared as deer caught in headlights, suggesting their actions weren't innocent. Mom promptly saved a copy to her own phone. "We're through with Chastity," Mom declared. I loved the shock on her face when served with the civil suit. "Julie and I blocked her number tonight," I informed her. As we were warned, they'd be served with lawsuits. Mom took their phones, and I guided her through the process. Sharing tea in the middle of the night with my mom brought back fond memories. Later, I instructed the receptionist to block all calls from my wife, not wishing to speak with her. Around 11, the receptionist asked, "She's calling every 20 minutes, how can we stop this?" "What's your mobile number?" I inquired. She provided it. "I'm sending you a video clip. If she asks to talk to me again, request her cell number. If she gives it, send her a copy and let her know Julie and I received it last night." That was the last I saw of her that day. Before leaving, she confirmed, "I did what you asked. Once she received it, the calls stopped. If you or Julie need anything, just call, okay?" I nodded in agreement. "Thanks, boss," she said. I kept it to myself while my mom cooked dinner and Julie assisted. I briefed my daughter on the work incident. A text from an unfamiliar number came through, purportedly from my mom, asking me to call her. It didn't take long to realize it was likely Michael's number. "I think your brothers will contact us around 8 tonight," I remarked. "Your mother will reach out to them. They were probably already at the house, found us gone." "If they do, they'll be surprised," Julie remarked. "I left a note for Mom suggesting you'd be making Michael move out since his wife kicked him out. It's amusing because I knew Chastity would never confess to our sons." "Hey Dad, let's ditch our phones for a bit," Julie suggested. "That way my brothers will have to reach out to Mom to figure out what's happening." That's exactly what we did, making it a peaceful night for us, but not for others. Later we learned that my sons visited our old home. Upon noticing my favorite chair missing, they searched the entire house. It became evident Julie and I had moved out when they found her note in the kitchen. Their calls to us went unanswered, adding to their frustration. Their mother claimed ignorance about the note's meaning and our departure. Despite their efforts, they couldn't locate us. Eventually, they turned to Uncle Charles, who hinted that perhaps I didn't want to be found, given what their mother had done. Shocked, they overlooked questioning how Charles knew. In their quest to find us, my sons spread news of the breakup faster than gossip could. By the following workday's end, my secretary connected me with Jake, my eldest, who promptly got to the point after exchanging pleasantries. "What's up, Dad?" he inquired. "Where do you and Julie live now?" "Not much, considering how what was once wrong is now right in our world and vice versa," I replied. "Let's steer clear of religion, Dad," he cautioned. "Just give me the facts." "Check your text for what I just sent," I instructed. "That'll answer your question. Forward it to Jason, and if you want to chat, swing by Grandpa's after dinner." With that, I ended the call, sent the video, and notified Julie of my actions. Within 10 minutes, Jake responded, "Wow, I'll be at Grandpa's by 8. My parents excused themselves, leaving my kids and me to discuss our marital situation. We listened to their advice on my next steps. The boys didn't view their mother's actions as grave and suggested I move on. "We all mess up, Dad. Remember how many times you forgave us growing up?" This irked their younger sister. "You may be my brothers, but you're both idiots," Julie spat angrily. "It wasn't an accident. Mom and Michael planned everything. The hotel room was booked for Mr. and Mrs. Deuce Michael Truscott a week before they left." Watching my son's expressions as Julie recounted the events was a look I'll never forget. "We watched Mom leave our house that Sunday afternoon, knowing she was going to cheat," Julie continued. "She made him pick her up, seeming apprehensive about what she was getting into. Dad offered to take her to the airport, but no, she wanted to flaunt it by leaving with him. We were probably the back of their jokes on the way to New York. She didn't know we knew, didn't realize we saw through their act." Julie asked me why I didn't intervene, and I explained she would have lied and denied it. "Your mother's actions showed she was leaving the marriage. This wasn't an accident, it was all planned," Julie emphasized. "Dad and I knew 2 weeks before she left. Michael's wife warned us. That's why we had video within an hour of them being served with the lawsuits. Boys, you need to understand your mother didn't just betray me," I addressed my children. "She did it to all of us. I'm seeing a doctor tomorrow to get tested for STDs. All my children gazed at me, astounded. "I'm doing this because I can't be certain she didn't have other lovers on the side," I explained. "This might be the first time she's been caught, but her frequent business trips over the years raise suspicions about their nature." "Dad, you can't be serious," Jason objected. "There's no way Mom had other lovers." "Given what we've learned, can we trust your mother to provide the truth?" I challenged. "Facts matter more than truth. If I test negative for an STD, it supports your belief." When my children remained silent, I excused myself, stating I needed to grab a coffee. My parents, who had been listening, agreed with my approach. "Clint, you're handling this wisely," my father remarked. "Considering her job and travels, it's plausible she had other partners. Mediations and business trips could easily provide opportunities. Even if she had separate numbers, calls between them can't be ruled out," I added. "In a society where one truth can be another's lie, I can't blindly trust her words." As my phone rang, I excused myself to take the call privately on the veranda. "Hi Louise, what's going on?" She told me about her conversation with Michael. Lou recounted it didn't go smoothly. He doesn't grasp why she's seeking a divorce, thinks she should forgive and forget. But she made it clear she doesn't want him in our daughter's lives. That's when he realized the depth of her feelings. He's clueless about the damage his deceit caused. Chastity's struggling now that she's unemployed. They'll be back Thursday, settling matters. I blocked her number for Julie and me, I added, and instructed the receptionist to reject her calls. She begged me to stop them, so I forwarded her the video you sent. Now she knows we're aware. Must be tough for her to lose control, Louise informed. Michael's stuff is in the garage until he picks it up, I continued. Change the locks too, just to gauge his reaction. I had a heart-to-heart with my kids. I explained why I'm getting tested. I asked them, "Do you honestly think your mother would confess if there were others?" Taking it one step at a time, Julie and I moved out. We wrapped up our conversation, wishing each other good night. When I entered the kitchen, they all fixed their gazes on me, anticipating my words. "I'm taking tomorrow off," I announced. "Got a lawyer appointment at 9. Want those two served with lawsuits as soon as they touch down on Thursday." Tears welled in my son's eyes, realizing the gravity of the situation. My father spoke up, addressing Jake and Jason. "Michael won't be the first, but he'll be the last. I'd have dealt with the first one differently." "That's not true," Jason protested. "Mom denied it until we showed her the video." "You're clueless," my mother interjected. "Ever wondered why your father never talked to Uncle Charles until now?" "They patched things up Sunday night." "Charles confessed," Julie added. "He admitted Dad didn't deserve it, but he did." Emotions ran high when I told Dad about their reconciliation. I put the kettle on as my children processed their mother's actions. Their future reactions would define them. The boys opted to head home, leaving the kettle boiling. With Julie in bed, I seized the opportunity for a heart-to-heart with my parents. "Mom warned they'll be watching you. How you handle it will guide them." "I understand, Mom," I replied. "I'll strive to remain composed and let the lawyers handle it. I can't alter the past except for drastic measures. It's beyond my control. Some might see this as the final call," my father conceded. "You're correct, but in my view, chastity isn't worth risking jail time," I affirmed, echoing Charles's sentiment. My father beamed with pride. "You're a better man, son. Your mother and I raised you well." At the lawyer's office, I detailed the events leading to our meeting. Her interest piqued when I mentioned my wife's employer. "Did you know I once worked there?" she revealed. "They have a strict code of ethics, which I still possess. We might consider suing the firm alongside them. While we may not gain much beyond legal fees given current judicial trends, it'll pose significant issues for both." "Brenda Ferguson, let's proceed," I agreed. "They're expected back from New York on Thursday's earliest St. Louis flight." After paying her fee, she expressed anticipation. Reflecting on this, I felt like David facing Goliath. The company she worked for was the largest in the area with 4 divisions. Our family doctor, who had known us for years, was surprised when I requested STI tests. Though unexpected, he agreed it was wise. Unbeknownst to me, my son Jake informed his mother about my tests. He candidly explained that due to Uncle Charles and Michael Truscott, uncertainties about additional partners lingered in the family. Despite his mother's absence, Jake reassured her not to worry, citing her history of deceit. "Mom, it's best to let things settle before explaining," he advised, wary of potential deception. Meanwhile, the company my wife worked for faced fines during their absence. My attorney pursued a $10 million settlement, highlighting the partners' dismissal as an admission of guilt. Upon their return, the couple faced procedural formalities, with my wife notably taking a taxi home alone. A doctor's call revealed I had a mild STD, which required reporting. Chastity was compelled to disclose her carnal history. The lawsuit made headlines at 6 p.m., exposing their actions. I updated Julie during her classes, prompting her to inform her brothers. My dinner plans coincided with her playful jest about my date. Louise greeted me warmly at Red Lobster, both of us dressed casually. "Louise finds you quite impressive," she chuckled. "My dad sees you as a rock star. If that doesn't humble Michael, nothing will." "The lawyer I hired sees this as a chance for payback," I explained. "She's leveraging her past HR expertise to sue them for policy breach." "I wish I could see their faces tomorrow," Louise mused. "It won't be a good day for them." As we sat down, she passed me an envelope. "Inside are statements from 5 of Michael's former subordinates," she disclosed. "They detail how he coerced them into satisfying his carnal desires." "This strengthens my case," I remarked. Originally, the lawyer thought winning enough to cover her fees would suffice, but this could reveal a broader pattern of misconduct. Louise and I bonded over our divorces, forming a friendship. As I returned home close to midnight, I reflected on the events since Chastity's departure. While making tea, my daughter's tears caught my attention, prompting me to make her a cup too. I told her, "It's okay to let it out. Crying is part of the healing process. I'm surprised you held it together this long." I comforted her. She embraced me tightly, releasing her emotions and tears. I held her until she found her calm. By the time we finished our tea, she had regained composure. "Curious about my dinner with Louise?" Julie inquired. I explained that it seemed like the beginning of a promising friendship as we got to know each other better. Julie had more questions about her, which I answered as best I could. At lunchtime on Friday, I delivered the statements to my lawyer. Later, she proposed turning it into a class action lawsuit, seeking larger compensation for all the women involved. I agreed and wished her luck. I learned from a friend that Chastity and Michael had a rough day. Despite their successful settlement, there was no acknowledgement of their achievement. The support I received from colleagues and senior management was heartening. On my way home, I withdrew $1,000 in cash and surprised my mother with it. She noticed, giving me a knowing look only a mother could. "I see it as a contribution to cover your additional expenses while we're here," I explained. "It would have cost me much more elsewhere." She looked like she wanted to say something, so I waited for her response. "This is a one-time thing, agreed?" I nodded, thankful for her leniency. Chaz returned home to an empty house, feeling like an outcast. After enduring a day of hostility, both she and Michael were unwelcome. Her husband Clint and his attorney were suing the entire firm. Chastity couldn't comprehend how Clint found a former employee to represent him, someone who never would have become a partner. It wasn't just about the lawsuit itself, it was about Clint using someone familiar with all the legal maneuvers, putting the firm at a disadvantage from the start. After fixing herself a rye cocktail, she sat down to read the divorce petition. It dawned on her that both her husband and daughter were aware of their plans when they left together. Now she had to face the reality of the end of her marriage. Feeling regretful, she messaged her husband and daughter, realizing the damage was irreversible. She hoped to delay until Clint calmed down, then perhaps they could talk. Jake's words echoed in her mind. Her actions now seemed deceitful to everyone. It wasn't worth the pain she was causing. While getting the mail, she found a letter from the county health department revealing I had contracted an STD. Overwhelmed, she broke down in tears. This nightmare only worsened with the revelation of past encounters on business trips, leaving her family to think poorly of her. Michael Truscott sat brooding behind the counter in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, drowning his sorrows over Louise filing for divorce. Amid his introspection, he failed to notice a man taking a seat beside him. Suddenly, a commotion erupted, drawing everyone's attention as a fight ensued nearby. Amidst the chaos, Michael was struck 3 times in the face, the assailant's words echoing Clint's resentment over his actions. Meanwhile, I grappled with resolving the situation with my eldest son, Jake, one Saturday afternoon, while tending to chores in my father's barn. Jake's stubbornness became apparent. After consoling his distraught mother, Chastity, he insisted that I take her back for the sake of everyone's peace, despite the upheaval caused by her actions. Understanding the futility of arguing with him, I patiently listened until he expressed his thoughts fully. "Jake, imagine if you were married," I began, "and discovered your wife was being unfaithful. Would you still offer the same advice?" His silence prompted me to continue. "You suggest I accept being with someone who's unfaithful. Does that mean you see me as insignificant, someone to be walked over?" His shocked expression revealed his realization. Distressed, I asserted, "If you can't respect my autonomy and decisions, don't come back." With that, I left him to ponder his words. His youthful impulsiveness mirrored my own past mistakes. Now he faced the consequences. Seeking counsel, Jake turned to Uncle Charlie, who likened his behavior to his own youthful folly. "Jake, your mother pursued me," Charlie disclosed. "I fell in love, and it led to 18 years of separation from my brother. Remember, there are 2 sides to every story. Your dad is right. Your mother didn't contract the STD from Michael. She brought it home, showing she saw your father as insignificant. After all he did for the family, this was his reward. Fix this or risk losing your father forever," Charlie warned. "She had her chance with me. Sadly, her actions show she learned nothing." At the firm where Chastity and Michael worked, Monday morning was triumphant. My lawsuit dropped, they were back in good standing, lauded for their successful settlements. Despite his injuries, Michael persevered, sharing the ordeal with Chastity privately. Exiting the nursing home, I found Chast by my car, worn out and weary. I treaded carefully in our interaction. "Back off," Chastity demanded. "Michael has his own troubles, thanks to your vengeful streak." I genuinely have no idea what you're talking about, I replied. He got attacked, Chastity persisted. The guy said he's your friend and he'll keep doing it. I couldn't help but laugh, finding it one of the best pieces of news in weeks. Once composed, I said, if I knew who did it, I'd buy them a whiskey. Your lover got off lightly. If it were me, he'd be dead. Then a text from Louise arrived, urgent and demanding my immediate presence. Another followed with her address. I quickly replied that I was on my way. You're colder and crueler than I've ever seen, Chastity remarked. Enough. Get your lawyer. Let's finalize this divorce. Without another word, I drove off, done with her lies and moralizing. Louise looked upset as I arrived. What's wrong? I asked, approaching. How can I help? Your dad's friend had Michael punched, Louise revealed, using your name. My grin said it all, bringing relief to her face. Aren't you angry or worried? She asked. Relieved. I wish I knew where he lives to send a thank you whiskey, I remarked automatically. Briefly hugging Louise, who didn't resist, I reluctantly let her go. But before I could apologize, she surprised me with a kiss on the cheek. They're both inside, wanting to talk things out with you, Louise informed, leading me to the kitchen while holding my hand. Spotting her daughters peeking out from a bedroom, I winked at them, receiving the same in return. Louise's father, a bit younger than mine, received my respect. Seeing the large African-American man, I smiled, saying, if you were of age, I'd send you a large bottle of whiskey as thanks. Extending my hand in friendship, he accepted, adding, think before doing anything foolish. My father's advice saved me trouble at your age. With tension eased, formal introductions followed, and soon it was time for him to take the young man home, leaving Louise, her 2 children, and me. Introducing themselves, Livia, 10, and Lori shared their favorite restaurant, an all-you-can-eat pizza place called Zizzy's. Kneeling down, I asked, would you ladies let me treat you and your mom to dinner there? Their immediate yeses, perhaps owed to my casual attire. Sounds fair. I just need to call my mom and let her know I won't be home for dinner, I informed the girls. What for? They asked curiously. To let her know, I chuckled, dialing. They found it amusing until we reached Zizzy's. Louise and I entered, the girls dashing ahead. As we settled at a table, Louise's colleagues spotted her. While she went for more pizza, one approached her. Are you Mom's boyfriend? Livia questioned. I'm just a guy, her friend, I clarified, unsure where this was headed. Did you two go on a date? Livia persisted. Not yet, but I'd need permission from someone special, I teased. Who? Lori inquired. From you and your sister, I replied, prompting laughter. You can, 'cause Mom already says she likes you, they revealed as Louise rejoined us, finding us in good spirits. After fetching more food, Lori joined me, expressing a desire for dessert. Once we returned to their house, I thanked them at the door, and as it opened, they hurried inside, ready for bed. Feeling inexperienced with dating, I decided it was best to bid farewell. As I prepared to leave, Louise called out to me. Turning back, we faced each other on the steps. She surprised me with a kiss, prompting a reciprocal response. My daughter mentioned you were going to ask me out, Louise revealed. Livia got it wrong, I explained. What happened while she was occupied with a colleague? We sat on the porch discussing our feelings like teenagers, admitting our mutual interest but apprehension about what lay ahead. With September winding down, we planned to take the girls to the town fair the following Saturday before deciding on our next move. It was nearly 10 when I reached my parents' farm. Walking in, Julie quickly noticed my upbeat demeanor. Looks like Dad had a big grin, Julie observed. The meeting must have been important for him to be so happy. I filled in my parents and daughter on the day's events. Dad found it amusing that Chastity asked me to back off from Michael due to his problems. On Friday, my lawyer launched a fresh lawsuit against the firm, implicating 4 senior partners and 16 female sufferers, all jointly charged. The claim was hand-delivered to the partners' homes, leading 3 to be barred from returning by their spouses. Brenda Ferguson persisted in her efforts to learn Chastity's divorce lawyer's name. Mom emailed many of Chastity's relatives, informing them of how Chastity and Michael were served with the lawsuit, alleging this wasn't Chastity's first affair on her business trips, and revealing Clint's STD diagnosis. I was about to leave to pick up Louise and the kids when Julie remarked, "You're really smitten with Louise, aren't you, Dad?" "I've noticed that since the divorce began." I explained, "Many of the friends your mom and I shared have faded away." Louise and I connected over our shared experiences, which made it easy to trust each other. It's too early to predict where our relationship is headed, but I'm open to the possibilities. "Dad, if you need dating tips, just ask," Julie offered with a grin. "Just promise to introduce us before it gets serious." It turned out Louise was afraid of heights, so I spent an hour on the Ferris wheel with her daughters, which they enjoyed. We went with the flow, enjoying the moment. Feeling hungry, we headed to the food area, with Lori perched on my shoulders. While waiting in line, my brother Charles and his wife found us with their kids. After introductions, we all sat down to eat. The kids hit it off, leaving us adults to follow along. After spending a small fortune on rides, Mary and Charles decided to host a family meeting on Sunday and invited Louise and her kids. Louise agreed to join us, but her daughters would be with their father for the first time since he returned from New York. By 6 p.m., the kids were exhausted. After bathing and tucking them in, Louise received a call from Michael, who couldn't pick up the children due to being in the emergency room. It seemed he had been punched again. Louise assured him it wasn't Chastity's husband, as he had spent the day at the fair with me and the kids. Michael wasn't pleased. Reluctantly, I left Louise's place around 9 p.m., knowing we'd start dating on Sunday. I picked up Louise and her daughters at 2 p.m. and headed to my brother's, where everyone was gathered, including Julie and her date, and my parents. Charles's family was all there too. It was a significant moment for my brother, having me in his home for the first time in his married life. Mary happily introduced Louise and her daughters to everyone, and they were quickly welcomed. Things got interesting when my oldest son suggested we talk. We moved to the edge of Charles's property. "Dad, I messed up," Jake admitted. "I fell for Mom's manipulation. She tricked me. Uncle Charles and my colleagues filled me in last week." "What did you learn from this?" I inquired. "When it comes to family," Jake responded, "sometimes it's best to keep your distance. No matter what you do, you might only make things worse. They need to figure it out on their own time, not yours." "You're right, but it's tough because we care so much," I acknowledged. "Your mom and I will talk someday, but it's not happening soon with how she's acted." "Her behavior," Jake echoed. "Yes, her actions speak louder than words," I elaborated. "Look at Louise. She endured a loveless marriage until she felt ready to raise her daughters alone. She showed patience until the time was right. Her behavior reflects her character. Your mom's behavior shocked your sister and me with its cruelty. Despite her words, her actions often contradict them. As our grandfather used to say," I continued, "if I'm not worth the truth, then you're not worth lying to." "Dad, here's a tough question," Jake said sadly. "What else did she lie about?" "That's a question we might never have an answer to," I replied. "There's no use dwelling on the past, son. All we can do is learn from it and move forward." "I'm really impressed by Louise, Dad," my eldest added. "But the more I hear about Michael and Mom, the more I think they belong together." Julie approached us, noting, "Your conversation is drawing attention. Maybe we can continue this later." "We're finished, sis," Jake assured her. "I just needed to apologize to Dad." With that, he walked away, leaving Julie curious. "Just a case of saying the wrong thing," I clarified. It's good to see he owned up to it. Charles and Mary enjoyed a delightful dinner. Mary captured several moments with her camera, especially when Lori kept watch over me. When the water fight began, I eagerly joined in, though it ended with me soaked. Resting in a lounge chair to dry off, Lori climbed into my lap and drifted off to sleep. Meanwhile, I noticed Mary and Louise discussing the budding connection between me and her daughters. My father joined me, remarking, "This little one seems to have chosen you. Just be careful and ensure revenge on Michael isn't your motive." I recounted our relationship's journey since Louise's first call. He nodded, acknowledging, "I should have heeded my instincts." He then revealed, "Your mother requested this conversation. Whatever path you choose, know you have our support." "Dad, look at our society," I began. "A staunch Democrat reminiscent of JFK switches parties, wins the presidency, while conservative Congress members bow out. The GOP now echoes Kennedy's views, but the media spews hatred, branding him a traitor to democratic values. Despite his consistency, public perception shifts. He's still a Kennedy Democrat, but they aim to impeach him for alleged wrongdoing. Meanwhile, they support a candidate who admits similar actions." "What's the message here?" my father asked. "They share the same disregard for truth, honesty, and morality as my soon-to-be ex-wife. To them, anyone not towing the new Democratic line is trash. Values only matter when they're behind bars. Then they feign remorse," I replied. My dad chuckled, saying, "People ought to flush 100% of media and social network truths down the toilet. Finding honesty in real life is tough, but many are too dense to grasp that. It's astounding to see two factions of Democrats at odds. This truth sheds light on much. And considering his remarkable achievements despite fierce opposition, I ponder whether their animosity stems from his competence overshadowing their ineptitude. Most seeking re-election boast years in office without tangible progress." "Strong words, Clint," Dad remarked. "It underscores the media's prowess as a propaganda tool." On Monday, while I was in my office, a detective came to discuss the ongoing issue with Michael Truscott. It took me about an hour to explain what I knew and provide a list of women whose spouses had discovered his affairs with their wives. "Officer, I suggest you speak with Brenda Ferguson and ask her for the list," I said. More than 6 weeks have passed since I learned about their relationship. Louise, Michael's wife, called me to inform me of their plans. It had been at least 4 weeks since they went on a romantic trip. I met his wife for the first time while he was in New York with my wife. Since then, due to our spouse's actions, his soon-to-be ex-wife and I have grown closer and are now in a relationship that we are still trying to understand. "It certainly presents a different picture," the detective said. "Michael Truscott has his reasons for accusing you directly. He seems to blame you for ruining his marriage rather than his own behavior. I'm beginning to think he's the type of person who can't accept responsibility and blames others." After he left, I called Brenda and told her what had just happened. She anticipated this. Michael was the kind of person who would set others up, and she believed he was behind her dismissal from the firm. Then Brenda informed me that my wife had finally found herself a lawyer. I found out when I returned home to my parents that it was my mother's letter that made Chastity give up. Until then, she still thought something could be worked out between us. Once I calmed down after everything that had happened, I realized that Chastity must have believed I sent the letter out of revenge. On Wednesday, Julie and I took Louise and her daughters to dinner at Olive Garden, where my sons joined us. During the meal, I shared that Chastity had finally hired a lawyer to handle her divorce. Louis's daughters seemed excited about Julie for some reason, and Julie enjoyed the attention. Overall, Louise and I considered the dinner a success. 2 months have passed since the last family meeting. On Friday afternoon, I sat next to Brenda Ferguson, waiting to be called before Judge Donald McDonald. Across from me in the hall sat my soon-to-be ex-wife and her lawyer from the same firm. We agreed on the property division. Since there was no mortgage on the house, it was straightforward. Chastity agreed to buy out my share of the house based on the current appraisal and give me half of our joint savings. When called before the judge, each of us confirmed our agreement, finalizing the divorce. Chastity stopped me on the front steps as I headed to the parking lot and said, "I ruined myself." I finally admitted my behavior to our sons. Julie still refuses to talk to me because she thinks what I did was intentional. I only wish I had realized earlier what kind of message I was sending. I would accept that explanation from our daughter due to her inexperience, I said, but from an adult it sounds self-confident and superficial. Louise. Divorce had already been finalized. She got everything she could from him. Michael was to pay $2,000 a month in child support, $500 each until they were 18, and half the cost of their post-secondary education. Their house was to be sold and the profits divided equally. Michael, for some reason, left the company and moved to another city to start his own business. It seems that his frequent, unexpected encounters with fists wore him down. With his share of the company, he was set for life. My parents invited Louise and the girls over for dinner. What we didn't know was that they also invited her parents. Given the developing relationship between Louise and me, they decided it was time to start getting to know her family in case things got serious. Brenda Ferguson negotiated with the insurance company responsible for the firm's liability insurance, and it looks like the case will be resolved out of court. After paying her 30% share, we all received more than $750,000. We sat around Mom's formal dining room table, which was being used for the first time in years, just relaxing after a big dinner. When I stood up, I pushed back my chair and got down on one knee. Taking the ring box out of my pocket, I said, "Louise, will you take a second chance and marry me?" Louise, in complete shock, said yes. That's when the real party started. Mom had to call Charles and Mary and my 2 sons to share the good news. They arrived within half an hour. Amidst all the excitement, I noticed Lori was crying, so I walked over to her as she sat on the floor. I sat down next to her. She immediately climbed onto my lap. "What happened, baby?" I asked quietly. "Nothing. I'm just happy that you're going to be my dad," Lori said. I looked at Louise, who had tears in her eyes. I think she could see them in mine, too. I stood up, holding Lori, and walked over to her mother. Everyone understood that this was an important moment of closeness. Livia came and stood next to us. "Dad," Livia said, "when Mom and you get married, will we also take your last name?" "As soon as the court allows," was my answer. "Livia and Lori," my father said, "from now on you can call us grandparents, okay?" My only thought was how much time my new daughters would spend with my parents. Both looked forward to time on the farm. My father would teach them to ride horses in no time, later in private. Louise asked how I planned to convince Michael Truscott to let me adopt his daughters and change their last name to mine. "Leave it to me," I said. Then we began our earnest search for a home. The plan was for Louise and the girls to move in before our wedding. About a month later, I showed up unexpectedly at Michael Truscott's office. His secretary told me to go in. I walked in and closed the door behind me. His face had begun to heal, but he looked much different. He had been punched 8 times. The detective interviewed all his former lovers and their spouses, but had no firm suspects. I decided to risk that Michael truly believed I was responsible for his injuries. "I think you heard that Louise and I are getting married," I said before he looked up. Michael's face went white as he looked up. He seemed to believe I was responsible for his injuries. "What do you want from me?" he said fearfully. "I need your permission in the form of a legal document to adopt your daughters so they can legally take my last name. This isn't just my wish, it's Livia's. She asked her mother and me if she and her sister could take my last name. This must be done in a way that legally recognizes us both as their fathers and allows them to change their last name to mine." "Why should I consider this?" he asked. "This will get you away from me forever," I said. "If you don't agree, you and I can meet often." It took him half an hour to type and print the document I requested. I knew he didn't care about his daughters because he hadn't seen them since he left for New York. His secretary, who was also a notary, certified and stamped the document. According to Louise, he only married her because she got pregnant. His family pressured him into proposing when they found out. I arrived at the school where Louise taught kindergarten just as she was letting the class go. I had to go to the office because they didn't know me there. I asked one of the employees to call her class and have her come to the office. She was surprised to see me. "Louise, I made a promise to your daughters on the day of our engagement," I said, handing her the envelope from my inside jacket pocket. "I think this will allow us to give them what they want." She took it, opened it, and read the document inside. "How?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears. "Michael still believes I'm responsible for his face meeting fists," I said. "I used his fear to our advantage to achieve this for us. I thought we could arrange it so that on our wedding day, Livia and Lori could legally take my last name." "Julie told me the night we got engaged that you always keep your word," Louise said, "especially in front of a child." "Do you think Brenda Ferguson will handle the adoption papers and file them in court?" I asked. "I'll call her office," I said, taking my cell phone out of my pocket. "The secretary should be able to answer that. If she can, I'll make an appointment for a time when you can come." The office secretary, a woman, overheard our conversation and said, "Louise, have you set a date?" "No, I wanted to, but Clint said he wouldn't do it until he found a way to convince Michael to let him adopt my daughters. He felt that if we were going to be a family, the kids should get what they want when we say our vows," Louise said. We were able to meet with Brenda later that afternoon. She was delighted for both of us. Within 20 minutes, she prepared the necessary documents and printed them with a notary statement I provided. They were due to be filed in court by the end of the day. It took a week before we found out that my adoption and their last name change would be approved. All they wanted to know was when it would take effect. To resolve this, we held a family meeting. We scheduled it for Sunday because the movers would still be moving Louise's and the kids' things to our new home. The rest of the week, Louise and I were at work. The next morning, when the detective investigating the ongoing attack on Michael Truscott visited us to inform us that 2 arrests had been made. One of those arrested was another senior partner at the firm with whom Michael had slept, and an African-American man who still believed they were in a relationship. Both of those arrested were men. My brother Charles and his wife met us on Sunday. We were the last ones to arrive, bringing a huge pot of Boston-baked beans that Louise had made. It was a potluck brunch. After the greetings, my future father-in-law asked, "What's new?" "We'd like to announce that in 2 weeks, 6 days before Christmas," I said. "If we can use the little shed for our parents' equipment, 2 things will happen. First, Louise and I will exchange vows, and second, the adoption of Livia and Lori will be completed. All 3 will take the name Walker. We will be spending our honeymoon next summer with our daughters," Louise added. "It will be either at Disneyland or Disney World." There was a commotion, but in a quiet moment, Livia came over to me and sat on my lap, saying, "Thank you, Dad." "For what?" I asked. "Because you love us enough to keep your word," she replied. I couldn't respond because the 10-year-old girl's sincere words left me speechless. I just took her into my arms and hugged her tightly. My mother-in-law is pressuring me to give my 3-year-old daughter to my sister-in-law and her husband. She's even threatening to take me to court, accusing me of being an irresponsible parent, which I'm not. I, 35 male, am a single dad to my 3-year-old daughter, Lily. My wife, Sarah, passed away 2 years ago from cancer. It was a devastating loss for both me and Lily, but we've been doing our best to move forward and create a happy life together. Recently, my mother-in-law, Karen, 58 female, approached me with a shocking request. She wanted me to give custody of Lily to Sarah's younger sister, Emily, 30 female, and her husband, John, 32 male. Karen's reasoning was that Lily needed a proper family with a mother figure, and that Emily and John were better suited to raise her. I was completely blindsided by this request. Lily is my daughter, and I've been doing everything in my power to give her a loving and stable home since Sarah's passing. I've rearranged my work schedule to be more present, hired a part-time nanny to help when I'm at work, and made sure Lily has plenty of playdates and activities to keep her engaged and happy. When I declined Karen's request, explaining that I had no intention of giving up custody of my own child, she became furious. She accused me of being selfish and not thinking about what was best for Lily. I tried to remain calm and reiterated that I was perfectly capable of raising my daughter, but Karen wouldn't listen. The situation escalated when Karen threatened to take me to court. She claimed she had evidence that I was an unfit parent and that she would use it to gain custody of Lily for Emily and John. I was shocked and hurt by her threats, especially since I've always tried to maintain a good relationship with Sarah's family for Lily's sake. I asked Karen what kind of evidence she supposedly had, but she refused to elaborate. She just kept insisting that Lily would be better off with Emily and John and that I was depriving her of a chance at a normal family life. I stood my ground and told Karen that I would fight any attempts to take Lily away from me. I reminded her that I am Lily's legal guardian and that there was no basis for her claims. I also pointed out that uprooting Lily from her home and separating her from her father would be incredibly traumatic for her. Karen stormed out of my house, threatening that I would be hearing from her lawyer soon. I was left feeling angry, hurt, and worried about what might happen next. Since then, I've been documenting all of my interactions with Karen and keeping detailed records of Lily's care. I've also reached out to a family lawyer to discuss my options and prepare for any potential legal battle. I'm confident that I'm doing the right thing by keeping Lily with me, but Karen's accusations and threats have left me feeling shaken. I can't help but wonder if I'm being selfish by not considering her proposal more seriously. Emily has been struggling with fertility issues due to hormonal complications. She and John have been trying to have a child for several years without success. I sympathize with their situation, but I don't believe this justifies taking Lily away from me. Over the next few days, I tried to maintain our normal routine for Lily's sake. I took her to the park, read her bedtime stories, and did my best to shield her from the tension with her grandmother. However, I couldn't help but feel a constant sense of anxiety, wondering when the other shoe would drop. A week after Karen's initial visit, I received a formal letter from a lawyer representing her. The letter outlined a series of allegations against me, claiming neglect and emotional abuse. I was accused of working too much and leaving Lily with strangers, referring to her nanny, who has been with us for over a year and whom Lily adores. The letter also suggested that I was emotionally unstable due to my grief over Sarah's death and unable to provide a nurturing environment for Lily. Reading these accusations felt like a punch to the gut. I've dedicated every part of my life to ensuring Lily's happiness and well-being since Sarah passed away. To have my efforts twisted and used against me was infuriating and heartbreaking. I immediately contacted my lawyer and forwarded the letter to her. She assured me that the claims were baseless and that we had a strong case to maintain custody. She advised me to gather character references from Lily's pediatrician, her preschool teachers, and other family members who could attest to my parenting abilities. As I began reaching out to people for these references, I was overwhelmed by the support I received. Lily's teachers praised her development and social skills, noting how well-adjusted she seemed despite the loss of her mother. Our pediatrician wrote a glowing letter about Lily's health and my attentiveness as a parent. Even some of Sarah's cousins and aunts reached out to offer their support, saying they disagreed with Karen's actions. Despite this flood of support, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Karen had been a part of our lives since Lily was born. She had helped us during Sarah's illness and in the aftermath of her death. I had always thought we had a good relationship, even if it was sometimes strained by our shared grief. Now it felt like she was trying to tear apart what remained of our family. I tried to understand Karen's perspective. Maybe she genuinely believed Lily would be better off with Emily and John. Perhaps she was struggling with her own grief and wanted to keep a piece of Sarah close by having Lily raised by her other daughter. But no matter how I looked at it, I couldn't justify her actions or the hurtful accusations she was making against me. Update: yesterday, Emily and John showed up at my doorstep unannounced. I was surprised to see them, especially after Emily's earlier call where she had apologized for her mother's behavior. Lily was napping, so I invited them in for a quiet talk. Emily started the conversation by saying that they believed it might be best for Lily to live with them. John nodded along, looking uncomfortable but supportive of his wife. I listened patiently, trying to remain calm. When Emily finished, I politely but firmly restated my position. I told them that while I appreciated their concern, Lily was my daughter and I had no intention of giving up custody. I emphasized that Lily was happy, well-adjusted, and that uprooting her would be traumatic. Emily's behavior suddenly changed. Her face hardened, and she accused me of being selfish. She said I was ruining Lily's life by depriving her of a mother's care. I was shocked. Then, Emily made an accusation that surprised me. She claimed that I was planning to marry another woman and make her Lily's stepmother. This was completely false. I hadn't even considered dating since Sarah's passing, let alone remarrying. When I denied this, Emily became even more agitated. In a moment that felt surreal, Emily then accused me of never having truly loved Sarah and not loving Lily either. She said that if I really cared about Lily's well-being, I would let her be raised by a real family. I was stunned into silence by the brutality of her words. As I struggled to respond, John tried to calm Emily down, but she brushed him off. She stood up abruptly and declared that they would be back with their lawyer. Emily stated that they would fight for custody and that I should prepare myself to lose Lily. They left quickly after that, leaving me reeling from the encounter. I sat in silence for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. After collecting myself, I called my lawyer to update her on this new development. She advised me to document the visit and Emily's threats, assuring me again that they had no legal grounds to take Lily away from me. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, I held her a little tighter than usual. I promised her and myself that I would do everything in my power to protect our little family. The road ahead might be difficult, but I was prepared to face whatever challenges came our way. Now I'm left wondering how things escalated to this point. How did a family that once supported each other become so fractured? And most importantly, how can I shield Lily from this brewing storm while still maintaining her relationships with her extended family? Update: 2 days after Emily and John's visit, I received a call from Sarah's grandmother, Elizabeth. She's always been a voice of reason in the family, and I was relieved to hear from her. However, what she told me left me shocked and furious. Elizabeth informed me that she had overheard a conversation between Karen and Emily. It turned out that their sudden interest in gaining custody of Lily wasn't just about family or providing a mother figure. There was a significant financial motivation behind it. Sarah had inherited a substantial sum of money from her late grandfather. Sarah and I had decided to put all of that money into a trust fund for Lily's future. The money was legally Lily's to be accessed when she turned 25. Elizabeth explained that Karen and Emily believed that if they gained custody of Lily, they would also gain control over this inheritance. They saw it as a way to solve Emily's financial struggles and fund expensive fertility treatments. I was furious. The idea that they would use Lily as a pawn in their scheme to get their hands on money that rightfully belonged to her was beyond comprehension. It explained their sudden change in behavior and the lengths they were willing to go to in order to get custody. Immediately after ending the call with Elizabeth, I contacted my lawyer. I explained the situation and asked for advice on how to protect Lily and her inheritance. My lawyer advised me to take the following steps: document Elizabeth's statement. She suggested I ask Elizabeth to provide a written statement about what she had overheard. Review the trust documents. We needed to ensure that the trust was ironclad and couldn't be accessed or altered if custody changed. Inform the trustee. My lawyer recommended notifying the trustee of the potential custody dispute to prevent any unauthorized changes. Consider a restraining order. Given the escalating situation, she suggested we might need to file for a restraining order against Karen and Emily to protect Lily. Prepare for court. While we hoped it wouldn't come to this, my lawyers started preparing arguments to present in court if necessary, focusing on Lily's best interests and the apparent financial motivations behind the custody attempt. I spent the next few days gathering all the necessary documentation and following my lawyer's advice. The betrayal, I felt, was immense. To think that Sarah's own mother and sister would try to use Lily for financial gain was heartbreaking. Despite my anger, I tried to remain calm for Lily's sake. She had picked up on the tension and had been more clingy than usual. I made sure to spend extra time with her, reassuring her of my love and commitment. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, I found myself reflecting on Sarah. I wished she was here to help navigate this mess, but I knew she would be proud of how I was protecting our daughter. I made a silent promise to her and to Lily that I would fight with everything I had to keep our little girl safe and secure. Now, as I prepare for what might be a long and ugly legal battle, I can't help but wonder, how did money manage to tear this family apart so completely, and how can I protect Lily, not just now but in the future, from those who might try to take advantage of her? Update: A week after my conversation with Elizabeth and my lawyer, I received a message from Karen. She wanted to meet and discuss things civilly, without involving the courts. I agreed, thinking it might be an opportunity to put an end to this nightmare. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in town. Karen and Emily were already there when I arrived. They both looked tense but tried to put on friendly faces. Karen started by saying they had reconsidered their approach and wanted to find a solution that worked for everyone. Emily chimed in, suggesting we could arrange more frequent visits and perhaps even some overnight stays for Lily at their house. I listened quietly, letting them lay out their proposal. When they finished, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to lay all the cards on the table. "I know about the inheritance," I said calmly. The effect was immediate. Karen's face paled, and Emily's eyes widened in shock. They exchanged panicked glances, clearly not expecting this. I continued, "I know that this isn't about Lily's well-being or her need for a mother figure. This is about Sarah's inheritance, which, by the way, is already in a trust for Lily's future." Karen tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "Let me finish. Sarah and I set up that trust together. It's for Lily's education and future. It's not accessible to anyone, including me, until she's 25. Emily started to tear up, whether from guilt or frustration, I couldn't tell. Karen looked like she was about to argue, but I pressed on. "I've been patient. I've tried to understand. But using my daughter as a pawn to get money is unforgivable. So let me be clear. This stops now. No more threats, no more accusations, no more attempts to take Lily away from me." I looked them both in the eye. "If you persist with this, I won't hesitate to take legal action. I'll file for harassment, emotional distress, and any other charge my lawyer advises. I have documentation of everything, including your financial motives." Karen's face hardened. "You can't prove anything," she said boldly. "Are you willing to risk it?" I asked. "Because I am. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Lily." The silence that followed was heavy. Emily was the first to break it. We just wanted what's best for Lily," she said weakly. "No," I replied firmly. "You wanted what was best for yourselves. Lily is happy, healthy, and loved. That's what's best for her." I stood up, ready to leave. "This is your final warning. Stop now, or we'll settle this in court, and believe me, you won't like the outcome." As I walked away, I heard Karen call out, "You can't keep us from seeing her." I turned back one last time. I never wanted that. You're still Lily's family, but it's up to you now to prove you deserve to be in her life. With that, I left the cafe. As I drove home, I felt a mix of emotions, relief at having confronted them, sadness at how things had turned out, but mostly a renewed determination to protect Lily and give her the life Sarah and I had dreamed of for her. When I got home, I hugged Lily tightly, grateful for her innocence in all of this. I hope that one day, when she's older, she'll understand that everything I did was out of love for her. Now I'm left wondering, was I too harsh? Should I have given them another chance? Or was this the only way to protect Lily and honor Sarah's memory? Final update. It's been 6 months since my conflict with Karen and Emily. The aftermath wasn't easy, but things have gradually settled into a new normal. After our meeting, Karen and Emily backed off. They formally apologized, acknowledging their wrongdoing and expressing remorse for their actions. While I appreciated this step, I remained cautious. We've slowly rebuilt some form of relationship, primarily for Lily's sake. They now have supervised visits once a month. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Lily is thriving. She's happy, energetic, and growing more like Sarah every day. We talk about her mom often, keeping her memory alive. I've started a support group for single parents who've lost their partners. It's been healing to connect with others who understand this journey. As for me, I'm taking it one day at a time. The experience has made me more protective of Lily, but also more appreciative of the life we have together. I'm grateful for the support I received and the strength I found to stand up for what's right. Lily's future is secure, and that's what matters most.
I think my coworker may have an affair with my wife, and it's looking like it may be true. I'm a 36-year-old man, and in 2014, I had a chance encounter with my now wife, who is 32 years old, at a local mall. Let's call her Gabby. Gabby was waiting in line at the food court when I first laid eyes on her. Interestingly, I had initially intended to dine at a different restaurant, but the line there was too long. So I joined the line at the restaurant where Gabby was standing. When our eyes met, I was taken aback by how stunning she looked. Upon seeing me, Gabby chuckled and explained that she wasn't in line for food. She mentioned that her cousin worked at the restaurant, and she was simply waiting for her cousin to finish her shift. I was overjoyed that she spoke to me because I was struggling to come up with something to say. Thanks to her friendly approach, I managed to break the ice with humor, and we engaged in conversation while she awaited her cousin. It was clear that I was leaving a positive first impression on her. As she waited for her cousin, I offered to buy her some food, but Gabby expressed a preference for a strawberry lemonade instead. I purchased it for her, and our conversation continued, with me maintaining a playful and humorous demeanor. When her cousin eventually emerged, I took the opportunity to ask for Gabby's phone number, and she gladly shared it with me before they left. From that point on, I made every effort to sweep her off her feet. After going on several dates, attending events, and socializing with her and my friends alongside her friends, we officially became a couple. In 2017, Gabby and I tied the knot, and as time went by, we became parents to 3 wonderful kids. We have 2 daughters, and our son is in the middle. Over the years, we've grown into being excellent parents for our children. It hasn't been easy, but we made the choice to cut back on going out to clubs and concerts, though we still managed to find occasional moments of fun. Our nightlife definitely took a back seat. I've always felt fortunate to have Gabby as my wife. Her personality is fantastic, and her stunning looks even earned me compliments from my friends. Gabby is of Cuban descent, and her appearance is a mix between the actress who portrayed Wonder Woman and Salma Hayek. She has a curvaceous figure, arm tattoos, and is known for her signature ponytail, especially in her selfies. Financially, we're in a comfortable position. I work as a maintenance man, and Gabby, along with her sister, works as interior decorators, which brings in good income. Her sister is the interior designer, and Gabby joined the profession when she saw its success. I've been dedicated to my job for 7 years. Little did I expect that someone from my workplace would cause trouble in my marriage. The issue started last Wednesday. There's a guy in the shipping department. Let's call him Daryl. While we're not close friends, I consider him an acquaintance, and we occasionally chat during lunch breaks. The most time I've spent with him was probably when we played dice in the parking lot at work. Our interactions mainly revolve around basketball discussions during lunch. One weekend, my car had brake issues, preventing me from driving to work. So my wife graciously offered to drop me off and pick me up after my shift. The first time she came a bit early and had to wait around 30 minutes for me to finish. During that time, she struck up a conversation with Daryl, a coworker, and another colleague I'll call Brianna. After introducing her as my wife, we engaged in some casual chit-chat before heading home. Looking back, that moment might have been the starting point of it all. I suspect that Daryl may have started getting close to my wife during that week when she had to pick me up from work. Whenever I finished my shift, I'd often find my wife hanging out with Daryl and Brianna. They would be in the office, enjoying some rap music through Daryl's Beats by Dre headphones connected to his phone. Gabby mentioned that she enjoyed talking to Brianna and would spend time in the office with her and Daryl. Since I knew that Brianna and Daryl lived close to each other and were good friends, I didn't initially feel uneasy about his presence around them. Following that week, Gabby started coming to my workplace to socialize with Daryl and Brianna. Given that Brianna was supposed to be my wife's friend, I didn't mind her visiting or chatting on the phone. However, I somewhat overlooked Daryl being consistently present and engaging in conversations with Gabby. My wife received a lot of attention, particularly on Instagram, so I tried to keep any concerns in check, even when I saw her talking to Daryl without Brianna around. I didn't want to jump to conclusions and risk upsetting Gabby, leading to daily arguments in Spanish. It was last Wednesday when my concerns about my wife's potential infidelity began to surface. On that day, as I was leaving my workplace, I bid farewell to a colleague. He happened to be on the phone at the time and also said goodbye. What caught my attention was the way he mentioned my name, as if the person on the other end of the line knew me. So I inquired about who he was speaking to, and he responded with a smile, mentioning it was an old coworker of ours. He then asked me to wait for a moment, saying that this individual wanted to have a quick chat with me. He handed me the phone, and I was actually glad to reconnect with this guy. In my conversation with this former coworker, whom I'll refer to as Tyrell, we reminisced about our past work experiences and why he had left. He explained that his brother worked in a warehouse in Atlanta, and Tyrell had relocated there after his brother promised him a job, playfully mentioning that he now earned more than us. After our catch-up, Tyrell expressed that he wanted to talk to me about something important and requested my phone number. I agreed, and he instructed me to send him my number via Facebook direct message, DM. I complied and returned my friend's phone. Immediately after I sent him my number, Terrell called me, even before I had reached my car. I answered the call and asked him what was going on. He inquired if I was in my car, and I confirmed that I was. He then urged me not to start driving because he had something significant to share. This raised my curiosity, so I pressed him for more details. He replied, emphasizing that I couldn't disclose what he was about to tell me to anyone, and I agreed to keep it confidential. He inquired about whether Gabby still visited my workplace, and this took me by surprise. I replied affirmatively, and he further inquired about whether Daryl was still conversing with Gabby. Again, I confirmed this, and his persistent questioning made me uneasy. He assured me he didn't want to stir up trouble, but believed Daryl had an interest in my wife. Since he no longer worked with us, he didn't care, and felt it was important for me to be aware of this. Hearing this sent a shiver down my spine. I questioned him about how he knew this, and he disclosed that he had witnessed their interactions. During his time working with us, Tyrell held a leadership position and moved between different departments. He mentioned that while walking around, he often observed Gabby and Daryl engaged in conversations. Additionally, he had informed our co-workers that he desired Gabby. He also made comments about her appearance. I probed further, asking Tyrell when he typically saw them together. He explained that it was usually about an hour before lunch. While he occasionally saw Gabby talking to Brianna, she conversed with Daryl more frequently. Tyrell indicated that it wasn't until she started visiting him on Saturdays, particularly when Daryl's department had to work overtime, that he suspected something might be happening. This revelation surprised me because I rarely worked overtime, making it unclear why she would be there. I inquired of Tyrell if he was certain about Gabby's Saturday visits, and he affirmed his certainty. He mentioned he was quite convinced that Daryl might be getting closer to her during one particular Saturday visit. Given the limited activities on Saturdays, they had a surplus of free time, and Daryl frequently played his Beats by Dre music speaker. Even with Gabby present, this seemed typical to Tyrell. However, after some time, he returned with news that he had heard loud Spanish music playing. Upon closer inspection, Tyrell described the situation as becoming intimate between Gabby and the guys. According to him, Daryl had a hold of Gabby by her neck while she engaged in twerking for him. Although my wife didn't possess an extremely curvaceous figure, she had enough to engage in twerking if she chose. I was left in shock when Tyrell shared this with me. I sought confirmation by asking if he was absolutely certain, and he responded firmly, emphasizing that he was not visually impaired. He recounted that everyone watched as she danced provocatively for Daryl, even mentioning that he lifted her shirt to reveal her backside through her leggings. I then asked whether she attempted to halt Daryl's advances, to which he replied in the negative. According to Tyrell, all she did was laugh and continue dancing for him, almost as if she were trying to win a competition. I struggled to believe the information Tyrell was sharing. He expressed his regrets and advised me to keep my wife away from him, including Brianna. I thanked him for sharing all of this with me and concluded our conversation shortly thereafter. I felt deeply embarrassed and humiliated by the situation. As I drove back home, my mind was filled with tumultuous thoughts. What bothered me even more was that Gabby's twerking incident with Daryl had occurred about 7 or 8 months ago. Who knows what may have transpired since then? They might have taken their rendezvous to his place, and she could have done more than just dance. I realized that I needed to confront Gabby and see if she would be forthcoming with the truth. Upon arriving home, I found my wife engrossed in a phone conversation with her mom. After some casual chatter, I asked her if she had met with Brianna today, to which she responded affirmatively. I then inquired about whether she had seen Daryl, and she replied in the negative. I expressed my surprise, mentioning that they seemed inseparable like the Three Musketeers. She claimed that Daryl wasn't around much, which I knew was a blatant falsehood. Following this exchange, my wife simply walked past me and into the kitchen to grab her phone, likely to text her friends. I couldn't believe that she had blatantly lied to me about her relationship with Daryl. Even I had observed how often he was around her, and I felt deeply hurt by what seemed increasingly evident. Subsequently, all I could do was watch her prepare dinner for our children while feeling a sense of sadness and despair. My emotions were a volatile mix of anger and teary-eyed sorrow. At this point, I desperately needed concrete evidence that something was indeed happening. However, obtaining such proof would be extremely challenging, given that it involved people I worked with. I couldn't risk losing my job, and Terrell's account of the twerking incident wouldn't suffice as grounds for divorce. Moreover, they could easily deny it ever occurred. My wife might argue that she was merely delivering lunch to Daryl, and the elderly security guard would likely corroborate her story. I had no choice but to assume that my wife had cheated on me. It was clear that she had secretly met up with Daryl and twerked for him 8 months ago. With so much time having passed, I couldn't fathom what might have transpired since then. I needed to figure out how to obtain substantial evidence that could be used in a divorce case, all while treading carefully to safeguard my job and anticipate potential backlash from her family. I will provide an update if I manage to devise a plan of action. Update. The situation keeps deteriorating, and I've been noticing more troubling signs. It's becoming increasingly likely that my coworker may have had an affair with my wife. To provide some context, my wife, whom I'll call Gabby, had to pick me up from work because my car needed new brakes. While waiting for me to finish work, Gabby struck up a friendship with a girl in the front office named Brianna and a coworker in the shipping department named Daryl. Whenever I left the floor, I would often see them chatting and listening to rap music. Over time, my wife became close friends with them, even visiting my workplace on her days off to join them during their lunch breaks. However, a few weeks ago, I received a distressing call from an old coworker named Tyrell. He informed me that Daryl may have made advances toward my wife. According to Tyrell, he witnessed them engaged in private conversations that appeared flirtatious. These interactions would typically occur an hour before Daryl's lunch break, which raised suspicion. What's even more troubling is that when Tyrell and Daryl worked overtime on Saturdays, Gabby would visit him. Initially, he hesitated to reveal anything, but one Saturday, he witnessed something that compelled him to share with me after Tyrell had departed. He described entering the shipping dock and hearing Spanish music playing. As he peered inside, he observed my wife dancing and twerking for Daryl. Their interactions began playfully, but gradually turned more sensual and aggressive. He recounted how Gabby allowed Daryl to grasp her by the neck and lift her shirt to reveal her backside. Although they had initially appeared to be engaging in playful banter, it became evident that their interactions had taken a more serious turn, particularly in the way they exchanged glances. My initial response was to make excuses for my wife, questioning whether he was certain it was her. He assured me of his certainty, pointing out that Gabby was of Cuban descent, had tattoos on her arms, and consistently wore her hair in a ponytail. Tyrell disclosed that after witnessing this, he decided to leave and head home. I struggled to come to terms with the shocking information he had shared. The revelation that my wife had been twerking for Daryl was distressing enough, but what made it even worse was that this incident had occurred approximately 8 or 9 months ago. Considering the passage of time, I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of her relationship with Daryl at present. While I appreciated Tyrell's honesty in sharing this information, I couldn't help but feel that it may have come too late. I wished he had spoken up at the time, but it appeared that his reluctance to snitch on Daryl had allowed the situation between Daryl and my wife to progress. Upon returning home, I initiated a conversation with Gabby regarding her friendship with Daryl. She claimed that she occasionally spoke to Daryl, but he wasn't usually around, and she primarily conversed with Brianna. I recognized this as a fabrication since I had witnessed their interactions on some occasions. Thanks to Tyrell's revelations, I began to see through the facade she was putting on. It became apparent that she was using her friendship with Brianna as a pretext to spend time with Daryl. Following my conversation with Tyrell and Gabby's dishonesty concerning her relationship with Daryl, I started to conduct some discreet investigations around the house. Unfortunately, I couldn't access her iPhone due to her secure passcode, and she seemed to be constantly engrossed in conversations with her mom and sister. Instead, I resorted to eavesdropping on her conversations, particularly those that occurred late at night. I noticed that she would often retreat to the back porch to engage in these conversations, prompting me to discreetly listen in. While I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, some phrases caught my attention, such as, "Stop, you're crazy," or mentions of having fun at a specific club in our suburban area. On one occasion, I overheard her saying, "She can't go over there." I strongly suspected that "there" referred to Daryl's house, but without the full context, I couldn't be entirely certain. When she returned inside, I questioned her about her phone conversation, and she claimed it was her sister Brianna, or someone else. However, the giggling and secretive behavior left me unconvinced by her explanation. I must have been oblivious before Tyrell's call because afterward, I noticed several red flags. My wife now always has her phone with her, avoids talking to me, and claims to be busy. When I suggested being intimate, She found it funny and said it wouldn't be appropriate with our kids at home. When I questioned why that would stop us, Gabby dismissed me as crazy and told me to leave her alone. She also said she wasn't in the mood. These actions both before and after Terrell's call have made me doubt my wife's fidelity, and I wonder how I ever considered this behavior normal. Last Saturday, I believe I caused her to miss an opportunity to be with Daryl, which angered her. After my work shift, Gabby called me while I was driving home. She mentioned her plans to go out again and told me to cook for the kids. I immediately assumed she wanted to meet Daryl, so I lied, saying I had errands to run before returning home. She claimed she was already getting ready to leave and asked her sister to watch the kids, even though I knew that wasn't possible. Despite Gabby trying to guilt me into making her stay home, I reminded her that I have the right to go out and do things, and I might not be back until later. Gabby responded with a dismissive, "Whatever," and hung up on me. Later that night, she had an attitude, and when I spoke a few words, she exploded with anger, blaming me for ruining her evening. I told her I didn't care, and that my errands were more important than her socializing. Gabby claimed I never mentioned running errands, and I countered by saying she never mentioned her plans to go out. After my shower, I noticed she was on the porch, talking on her phone and looking irritated. I'm pretty sure she was discussing me. However, a couple of days ago, things took a turn for the worse. That night, after I finished work, Gabby prepared dinner. She entered the bedroom while I was browsing new Jordans on my phone and informed me that dinner was ready. When I arrived in the dining room, she was dressed up, getting ready to go out. I inquired about her plans, and she mentioned she was heading out with some friends, leaving me in charge of the kids. I asked her with whom she was going out, and Gabby simply replied, "Her friends, again." I expressed my concern that she couldn't just leave like that, and she accused me of trying to control her. With an attitude, she walked out the door. I was quite upset because I knew what this was all about. She was still upset about the Saturday when she couldn't see Daryl, and she had been visibly sad about it ever since. My wife didn't return until around 2:30 in the morning. Throughout the night, I sent her texts, and her only response was, "Please stop texting me," which frustrated me. When she finally arrived, I was playing our son's PlayStation, and as soon as I saw her, we began arguing. I questioned why she came home so late, and she simply stated that she was hanging out with her friends, a response I wasn't willing to accept. I pointed out that I was supposed to be in bed, but I stayed up waiting for her to come home. She claimed that I never complained when she came home late in the past, to which I responded that I was always with her, so that argument didn't hold water. She cursed at me and accused me of trying to control her, but I disagreed. After a while, our son came out to see what all the yelling was about, and when he asked what was wrong, Gabby said she wouldn't argue with me anymore and stormed into the bedroom. My son saw the video game running and asked if he could play it. I agreed, but told him it would be just for a little while before he needed to go back to sleep. Once he agreed, he started playing the game while I wanted to continue arguing with Gabby. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into thinking I was a controlling husband, especially when she was the one who came home late. I usually tried to stay calm, but my suspicions got the best of me. Coming in at 2 a.m. was disrespectful, especially considering how she had left. After our argument, we went into our bedroom to continue discussing when she had left. As I entered the bedroom, I was about to argue, but I stopped mid-sentence when I saw something surprising. When I walked in, my wife was undressing, and it looked like she was wearing a black string as underwear. I suppose she thought I would still be with our son because she seemed surprised when I walked in. She just stood there in a piece of string, and I saw her differently. After briefly looking at me, she gave me a look that suggested we would just end up arguing if I asked her anything. She grabbed her pajamas from the bed and decided to change in the bathroom. I couldn't believe what I had just seen, and I have to admit it left me stunned. I decided I would sleep on the couch because it would be awkward after that. My brain couldn't process what I had witnessed. I had never seen my wife wear such revealing underwear before. It was almost like she was wearing a black string. To be fair, Gabby did own some provocative underwear, but she hadn't worn them in a long time. She liked wearing skimpy swimwear for vacation photos on Instagram, but what she had on was more like something you'd see on a website like WorldStar. At this point, I was convinced that my wife was acting incredibly suspicious and keeping secrets. After coming across some advice online, I saw that many suggested recording her saying or doing something incriminating. So, I ordered a voice-activated recording device, VAR, and planned to place it in her car. I asked a friend if I could use his address for the delivery, and he agreed without asking any questions. I'll pick up the device when it arrives in the mail. The last thing I need is for her to see the package and start questioning me about it. I'm determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Thanks to Tyrell, many of my suspicions seem to be on point. I'll try to provide updates, but I should be able to do so as long as I can keep my emotions in check and act as normal as possible. Update. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has supported me during this challenging time with my wife. Your assistance in my quest to discover if my wife has been unfaithful has been invaluable. These conversations have been essential, providing both strength and wisdom in my pursuit of the truth. I truly appreciate all the support. However, the advice I've received here has been somewhat divided on how to handle this situation. Some have suggested using evidence and proof against her, while others advise confronting the red flags head-on. I was trying to decide the best course of action, but today, my wife made a decision that forced my hand. Yes, my wife broke her vows. During our vacations, she would wear revealing swimwear, but it was usually for Instagram photos to showcase herself. It's widely understood that this type of string underwear isn't something you wear casually. It's meant to be shown off to someone. Witnessing this left me stunned, and I simply walked out of the room without engaging in an argument. Thanks to Tyrell, my world is currently in turmoil, and the signs are unmistakable. Before Tyrell's input, I always tried not to be the jealous type. Gabby is undeniably beautiful and receives compliments regularly. She enjoys sharing pictures on Instagram and garners a lot of attention there. Many comments on her photos are inappropriate, and even older pictures still receive likes. It's challenging for a jealous person to be with a wife who has thousands of guys following her on social media. I was aware of this and tried to be understanding. However, this situation is different, and I may have been too passive because we're married. I believed that this situation needed to change, and it was time to gather evidence. After purchasing a voice-activated recording via our device, I planned to obtain proof, and if it turned out to be real, I intended to seek a divorce. With the VAR device in hand, I rode with her to the supermarket, hoping to improve our relationship. I thought that if there were issues between us, we could address them, and she would stop seeing Daryl. I told Gabby that it was fine for her to go out with friends, but as a parent, she still had responsibilities to her family. She responded by asserting her independence as a grown woman and accused me of being controlling. She insisted on her right to spend time with her friends and not be confined to the house or work all the time. I mentioned to her that I understood her desire for fun, but her spontaneity was becoming excessive. She wouldn't disclose when or where she was going. Gabby acknowledged this and said she'd be more considerate of me and our family. Following that conversation, she did show more consideration for my feelings, and it felt like we could have a deeper discussion about our relationship. However, that changed when Daryl called a couple of days ago. Initially, I wasn't sure how to handle this, but this afternoon, Gabby pushed me to take action. Earlier this week, she mentioned that all our kids wanted to watch a Pixar movie with their older cousins this Saturday. She said she would take them so they could all watch the movie together, which I thought was a great idea, as it meant quality time with the kids. When they left a few hours later, I received a call from my nephew. He mentioned that he heard we had a particular video game he wanted to play and asked if he could come over after the movie. I told him that if Gabby was planning to bring him back home after the movie, he could come over and play the game. He was excited and said he would ask Gabby when she came to pick them up after the movie. His statement confused me. I thought Gabby was supposed to watch the movie with them, but he told me Gabby had informed them that she was just going to drop them off. I had slept in a bit that morning, so I wondered if I had misunderstood. However, I distinctly remembered Gabby saying she would watch the movie with the kids, and now I realized it was a lie. It was then that I recalled it was a Saturday, and Tyrell had mentioned that Gabby would spend overtime with Daryl on Saturdays. Considering the time, the guys would still be working if it was indeed a Saturday. When I tried to call my wife, she didn't answer the phone, which infuriated me. Following that, I called my workplace and asked the security department if the guys were still working. They confirmed that they were, and I hung up, deeply suspicious of whether Gabby was actually with Daryl. I got in my car and decided to drive to my workplace, knowing I could likely arrive before they left. During the drive, all I could mutter was "stupid B" in frustration for what she was putting me through. I didn't know what to think, but I was filled with anger. We had discussed this issue before, and I thought she had understood. This time, I was determined not to let it slide, especially since she had lied to me. If Daryl was avoiding my wife, I no longer cared. I drove into the parking lot and began searching for her car. I quickly spotted it, and I was already feeling angry. I entered the building and headed down to the shipping dock where Daryl was working. As I walked through the double doors, Daryl's crew jumped up, surprised to see me. They were wearing their jackets, which suggested they were about to leave until they noticed me. Scanning the area, I couldn't spot Daryl or Gabby, so I figured they must be in the trucker's lounge room. As I was heading in that direction, one of the crew members tried to block me and told me I didn't belong in the building. I warned him to back off, making it clear I wasn't joking and would confront him if necessary. He tried to act tough, but he didn't budge, indicating he didn't want to fight. Without wasting any more time on him, I proceeded to the trucker's lounge where they had to be. The trucker's lounge used to be a small area where truckers would wait for their trucks to be loaded. A few years ago, they implemented a new rule that required all truck drivers to remain in their trucks and wait until they received their paperwork. This rule was meant to prevent theft, although I couldn't fathom why anyone would want to steal the cargo they were shipping. The room was small, with only 2 vending machines that were no longer operational. I was sure I would find them there, and hearing Daryl's groaning confirmed my suspicions. Staying close to the wall, I peered inside and couldn't believe what I witnessed. Daryl was involved with my wife, and it was shocking. Not only did I see Daryl sitting on a couch with his shirt unbuttoned and his pants and underwear down, but he also had my wife's face in his lap. It resembled a scene from a dark story, as if he were a lord in the mountains, forcing a village woman to engage in explicit activities. He looked down at my wife while she knelt obediently performing a certain act. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, sensing that I might need it. I started recording, capturing at least 7 seconds of their actions. Gabby was clearly too preoccupied to notice, and Daryl was simply watching her. After obtaining some evidence, I confronted them loudly, shouting, "Damn you, witch!" Daryl appeared surprised to see me, while Gabby gave me a highly annoyed look on her face. She looked up at me and asked in an agitated manner what I was doing there. I just shouted at her, "Damn you, witch! Is this how you treat me?" She replied, "Can you please just go away?" Mind you, she was still holding him in her hand. I retorted with anger, saying to forget both of them while she covered her face, exclaiming, "Oh my God!" What surprised me was that she didn't appear embarrassed about being caught. She seemed more embarrassed by my behavior in front of Daryl. Following that, I unleashed a string of insults at her, but all she did was roll her eyes and implore me to leave them alone and just go away. It seemed like she just wanted me gone, and the fact that our marriage was over didn't matter to her. It felt as though she was saying, "Oh well," which infuriated me even more. After hurling countless insults at her, all she could muster were phrases like, "Please leave," and "I don't care." I yelled at her, questioning how she could do this to me after claiming she loved me. She shot back, "I don't love you like that, okay?" Hearing that nearly crushed me, and she repeated her demand for me to leave. I informed her that I wanted a divorce, and she responded in a frustrated tone with a simple, "Okay." After that, I exited the warehouse, got into my car, and drove home. Upon reaching home, I was consumed with anger. I punched the walls and yelled at the top of my lungs. I couldn't believe she would betray me like this. She had become a person I no longer recognized, and I was absolutely fed up with the nonsense she had put me through. As it stands, she still hasn't returned, and I have no idea where she is. I suspect she might be with her sister, having to explain the situation. Whatever comes next, I have irrefutable evidence of her infidelity. I intend to use it in various ways, especially during the divorce proceedings. It clearly demonstrates her irresponsibility and lack of concern for our marriage. It's unfortunate to admit, but I likely shouldn't have relied on Tyrell to inform me about this, as the signs were already present. She only valued the things I did for her, and that's the sole reason she married me. Gabby didn't seek love, she simply craved being wanted. Since Daryl was attractive to her and desired her, they became involved. Relationships like this one usually end in failure because women like her tend to revert to their true selves. I recently purchased a voice-activated recorder, VAR, which I've only used once. It appeared that all I required was someone who no longer worked with us. Update. People here seem to believe that I was hesitant to confront my wife, but that's not the case. After discovering my wife's infidelity, I took significant steps to consult with a lawyer and initiate divorce proceedings. Gabby was the type of person who felt entitled if she were to be married. I spared no expense to keep her content, and she led me to believe that's what a good husband should do. She acted as though I was fortunate because she was a trophy wife, especially considering the attention she received. I bought into it, particularly since she was a devoted mother and initially a good wife. She didn't love me. She only craved the attention and the comfortable life I had worked hard to provide. Another issue was that Gabby always sought attention. This was evident in her love for Snapchat and Instagram. She had a large number of followers, with 80% of them being men. Even worse were the comments on her posts. That's why I had to develop a thick skin when I was with her, especially when she posted bikini photos from our trips to places like Vegas and Jamaica. It was now clear that she wouldn't change. Despite finding someone willing to take care of her, It didn't matter when she encountered someone she found attractive. He treated her as she believed she should be treated. With everything coming to an end, I had to face the reality of the situation and decided to call my siblings to share everything with them. It was something I didn't want to do, but it was undoubtedly the right time. I called my older brother, who we'll call Ricky, and vented about what had happened, using a lot of strong language. After he asked if I was home, he mentioned he needed to run an errand but would swing by later. Next, I called my younger sister and shared the news with her too. She gave me a lecture but suspected Ricky would contact her about it. She said she'd check on me later and hung up. Later, she called back and told me Ricky was on his way to pick me up. She asked about the kids, and I said they were at the movies, with Gabby responsible for picking them up. She wasn't thrilled about watching the kids, but given my emotional state, there wasn't much we could do. After hanging up, I started to doze off until I heard Ricky's car pull up. I opened the door and saw my imposing-looking brother approaching with a bag and his toolbox. Ricky had a tough appearance, having played football in high school and college, and now with his shaved head and beard, he looked like a military veteran. He came over and gave me a heartfelt hug. Even though we typically played the tough guy role with our emotions, tears welled up because we both knew it was what I needed. After the hug, he mentioned that he had stopped at a store and bought new locks for the house. He thought it was crucial to secure the place so Gabby couldn't come in later and take everything. After an hour of talking and changing the locks, we went to Ricky's house. Ricky and his girlfriend were incredibly supportive and did their best to lift my spirits throughout the weekend. My sister Gina also came over to talk to me. After reaching out to the rest of my family, I couldn't help but replay the traumatic event in my mind. I hoped to catch my wife confessing or something similar, but the opportunity for confrontation arrived sooner than expected. When she admitted she didn't love me in that way, a burning desire for revenge consumed me. I wanted payback for how she had deceived me that day. The urge for vengeance was strong, and I wasn't finished dealing with this situation yet. On that Sunday, Gabby's sister actually gave me a call. Initially, my brother didn't want me to answer, but I had to remind him that my kids were over at Gabby's place. I stepped out of the room and answered the call. After picking up, her sister, who we'll call Christina, asked me what was happening. She mentioned that her sister wouldn't return to the house, but didn't want to explain why. I told her the truth, that I had caught her sister cheating on me at my workplace. There were a few seconds of silence after that. Then she started denying it and claimed I was lying about her sister. After letting her vent, I told her to hang up, saying I would show her the evidence. She started saying something, but I hung up angrily. After that, I sent her the video and didn't hear from her for the rest of that day. Following that, I spent the remainder of the day trying to relax. When Monday came, I went to work and spoke with my supervisor about Daryl and Gabby. Surprisingly, he provided me with a testimony sheet to file my complaint. While I was completing the paperwork, he expressed his sympathy and asked if I was certain this was happening. Angrily, I confirmed and asked him if he wanted to see the video I had taken. He was surprised and inquired if I actually had evidence. I confirmed that I did. He took back the form I was filling out and said it wouldn't be necessary anymore. He picked up the phone and discussed the situation with someone. After hanging up, he mentioned that he had contacted the manager and asked them to send the video to his email, as he would address it when the boss visited the facility in a couple of days. I agreed to this, but also informed him that I wouldn't be coming to work during those days, to which he was just about to suggest the same. A few days ago, Gabby's sister Christina called me back, which surprised me. She said she had talked to Gabby, and Christina wanted me to have a conversation with Gabby that night because the kids wanted to come home. I agreed to take my kids, but expressed my reluctance to talk to Gabby because, in my view, there was nothing left to discuss. She mentioned that she understood Gabby had made a mistake, but believed I should be the more reasonable one and consider the family. Somehow I felt like I was the one being unreasonable. I informed her that I wasn't willing to talk to her because she had cheated with my coworker and caused embarrassment at my workplace. I pointed out to Christina that she had brought another guy into my house and I was expected to act like none of that had occurred. She replied by saying that wasn't true, claiming that Gabby only had involvement with him at work or at his place. I laughed it off and remarked, "How can I be sure of that?" I mentioned that, for all I knew, she might have been involved with Daryl's friends when she was around. Chris got upset and stated that wasn't how it happened. I asked her to clarify what did happen, and that's when she revealed everything Gabby had told her. I regretted bringing it up, especially because I knew Gabby wouldn't lie to Christina, which made it even worse. According to Christina, when Gabby first met Brianna, Daryl was already talking to Brianna, and Gabby informed them that she was there to pick me up. While waiting for me, they started talking and began hanging out whenever she came around. Chris said they became friends over time and enjoyed spending time together during lunch. She mentioned that Daryl began complimenting her, particularly on her appearance, which surprised her but made her feel good about the attention. One day she slipped up and told Brianna that she found Daryl attractive, and Brianna informed him about it. Chris explained that after that, he started getting too close to her and making inappropriate comments. When she heard this, she played it off, but deep down she liked him and often thought about it. I expressed my disbelief and asked her why she didn't tell me earlier, as I would have put a stop to it. She replied that she didn't want to because she really liked him and found his unpredictable behavior appealing. I inquired about when all of this started, and Christina hesitated to tell me at first. However, when I threatened to end the call, she had to reveal the details. She mentioned that she wasn't sure when it started, but Gabby had told her about a birthday party hosted by Brianna's sister. I was aware of Brianna's sister's tendency to get drunk at parties. Brianna had invited Gabby to the party, and she had attended. According to Christina, Daryl had also been present at the party. She mentioned that Gabby was taken by surprise when she saw him at the party, and they spent time together having a good time. Christina asked if he was trying to pursue her, and Gabby confirmed that he was. She explained that they started dancing together, but things took a more aggressive turn over time. I inquired about what she meant by aggressive, and she said he asked her to twerk for him. Gabby turned around and began twerking on him. She mentioned that with the tight leggings she was wearing, it was evident that he was enjoying her twerking and grinding against him. After a while, he began kissing her, and they progressed to making out. Christina explained that they started going out together, and things began to escalate beyond what was acceptable. This raised more red flags for me. She went on to say that when Gabby went to hang out at Daryl's apartment with Brianna, he made advances on her, and she allowed it. Seeing this, Brianna left them alone in his apartment. Chris added that after making out, he performed BJ on her. Eventually, he repeatedly attempted to engage in BJ, and sometimes she allowed it, while other times she stopped him. It reached a point where she no longer resisted, and he convinced her to reciprocate. I asked Christina if these encounters happened when my kids were around, and she clarified that everything occurred at work and at his apartment. I expressed disbelief and told Christina that I couldn't believe she had done this to me. She replied that she couldn't believe it either, and mentioned that Gabby thought he was skilled and appreciated his wild nature. Christina explained that Gabby initially thought that going down on her would be the extent of it, but he desired more. She recalled a day when he turned her around and pinned her against the couch. She admitted that in hindsight, it was clear that the day had come when he had his way with her. Christina told her that she should have gotten up and left, but she couldn't bring herself to do it, allowing him to take her from behind. I shook my head in disbelief and had to ask once more how in the world she could do this to me. She explained that Gabby had found it all very exciting, and the fact that it was wrong added to the thrill. Christina mentioned that she had always been attracted to his rebellious nature, and when he finally won her over, he didn't disappoint. She noted that he was so eager that she was worried the neighbors might hear them. I could relate to what she was saying because when I was younger, my brother and I had to help my aunt move out of one of her apartments. While we were moving things, we suddenly heard loud noises. Later on, we realized that someone in the apartment below us was watching an action movie or something, and it sounded like Vin Diesel or James Bond was living right beneath us. The walls were incredibly thin, to say the least. If Daryl's apartment was as budget-friendly and poorly constructed as my aunt's, then it's highly likely that the neighbors could hear Daryl and Gabby, especially if they were being intimate from behind. She explained that after that initial encounter, whenever he wanted it, he got it. It was meant to be their little secret until Tyrell spilled the beans, showing that he had more courage than they had assumed. Christina started to say more, but I told her that the details about the party and the apartment situation were already overwhelming. She asked if I could at least be the calm and rational one again and have a conversation with Gabby, but I firmly declined. I explained that I would be coming over tomorrow to pick up the kids, but I had no intentions of having a conversation with Gabby. She suggested that it wouldn't work if both of us were stubborn, but I reiterated that she had made a fool out of me, and I had no intention of giving her another chance. I informed her of my plans to pick up the kids, and she expressed frustration, letting out a groan before hanging up. On that day, I felt really down, and I had to work my way back up from that low point. A few hours later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. They followed up with a text, and I realized it was a coworker I knew, which surprised me. I was driving at the time, so I connected the call through my Bluetooth dashboard. He inquired about what was going on, and I simply mentioned that I was running errands. He then asked me if I had anything to do with Daryl getting fired, which caught me off guard. According to him, there were 2 men and a woman in suits who came to our workplace with our supervisor. They went straight to the area where the truckers' lounge was located. Hearing this, I suspected that they were checking the lounge to see if it matched the room in the video. Later, he mentioned that about 20 minutes after their arrival, They called Daryl to the office and asked him to gather his belongings. I confessed the truth to my coworker, and he said he would have done the same thing. He also asked when I would be returning to work, and I informed him that I planned to come in on Friday and work a half day. He responded positively and said he'd catch up with me later. I felt relieved and made dinner for myself that night. Now my main focus was on the divorce proceedings. The following day was the day I had to pick up my kids, and I wasn't particularly looking forward to it. It had been several days since I had seen Gabby, and my brother Ricky joined me just in case. When I arrived, my kids were genuinely excited to see me. They told me that their mother had been unkind to them and had been ignoring them, so they wanted to come home. Glancing over, I saw Gabby in the kitchen on her cell phone, ignoring me and chatting with her sister. I told the kids to go ahead and get in my car, and my oldest daughter asked if she could bring her iPad with her. I agreed, but Gabby suddenly objected, saying that she had to leave it with her because she had bought it. My daughter was becoming emotionally upset, so I instructed her to wait in the car. When she walked away, I expressed my disbelief that she would act so petty. This led to a heated argument, and I didn't hold back this time. I called her derogatory names, and she retorted by labeling me a snitch for getting Daryl fired from her job. I pointed out that she had previously claimed not to know Daryl that well, and she responded with profanity, telling me to go cry to my mama. She also remarked that I was fortunate she even paid attention to me. She suggested that Daryl and I could have settled things with a fight instead of getting him fired. I retorted that I only fight for real women, not thots who don't deserve that privilege. She insulted me, calling me dusty and lame, and declared that she doesn't love a lame guy. Frustrated, I grabbed a glass of orange juice and threw it at her, narrowly missing her. In shock, she retaliated by throwing a fork at my head, which thankfully missed as well. All of this chaos was eventually stopped by my brother Christina and Christina's friend who were present. Gabby continued yelling that she didn't want me and kept saying, "Next, next!" My brother practically dragged me to the porch to calm down. And once I had cooled off, I left because I had expended all my energy and couldn't fight my brother to get back inside. When I returned to the car, I informed my daughter that her mother had taken the iPad. She responded by saying she didn't care anymore. She just wanted to leave. I couldn't believe the ordeal I had just gone through, and while I acknowledged that I had crossed a line, it still felt good to let out my frustrations on her. Right now, my kids are with me, and with the new locks on the door, they will remain with me. I had to gently break the news to the kids that their mother and I wouldn't be living together anymore, which crushed them, though they understood. As I mentioned before, my main focus now was on the divorce papers, and the lawyers I spoke to said the video could be helpful in various arguments. I firmly believe my wife is overly self-assured, and I hope her actions were worth it. If she thinks she can have a meaningful relationship with Daryl, she's deluding herself. Daryl, or anyone else for that matter, is unlikely to commit to her. She's approaching 40 and has many kids, and he's not looking to become a stepdad overnight. If that's her expectation, I know Daryl better than she does. Gabby was merely a conquest for him, and once he's done, he'll move on to someone else. I'm certain that reality will sink in soon, and it probably won't take even a year. At least now I can have some peace of mind. But I still worry about my kids and my immediate family, perhaps even Christina if she ever realizes how foolish Gabby's actions were.
The lengthy journey from Singapore to Chicago's O'Hare Airport, including a layover in Taipei, didn't trouble me significantly, even though it took nearly a full day. The fact that I was traveling in business class on my birthday made it more bearable. I wasn't particularly concerned about the challenging discussion awaiting me with our company's international stock and share trading department chief in Chicago. However, my thoughts were preoccupied with the situation unfolding at home, which was causing me considerable worry. After landing at 8:30, I checked into the Chicago Sheraton Suites, showered, hit the gym, then took another shower, alternating between hot and cold water to wake myself up. I went down for a hearty American breakfast, which I had missed over the last 4 months, and drank 4 cups of coffee. Then, I headed to my 10:30 meeting at J.P. Morgan. Upon arrival, I was escorted to a small conference room, and it was clear they were playing hardball. The room had 2 cameras, likely watching me. I stood by the window without moving for over 17 minutes, counting in my head. I had learned to show no fear or weakness, a lesson from my many trips to the Far East and Southeast Asia. Joe Rutledge, Vice President of International Stock and Commodities Traders, entered the room with Samuel Young, our corporate lawyer. The atmosphere shifted. This was a serious meeting. If it had been just Joe, we would have brainstormed solutions. If it had been only Samuel, the focus would have been on legal protection for the bank. But with both present, it was clear someone was about to be fired. Me. Joe gestured for me to sit and took a seat opposite me, indicating the tension that lay ahead. He demanded to know what had happened in Singapore. I acknowledged my role in approving a $300 million stock buy for a newly listed company, despite its lack of a proven track record. I defended my decision, citing the strong prospectus and the expertise of the management team, which collectively had nearly 200 years of experience. I highlighted the project's technological soundness and backing by reputable firms. However, Joe was irate about the company's declining stock price, which had fallen from $17 to $9.55 since listing. Despite the situation, I remained optimistic, explaining our strategy to buy more shares, anticipating a rebound that could yield substantial profits. I noted that we were the largest shareholder, holding 25% of the stock. Joe's frustration escalated as he argued that the company was tanking, fueled by short-selling competitors from China and Southeast Asia, aiming to undermine our position in the market. I reiterated the need to stay the course, but Joe dismissed my report as wishful thinking, informing me that the board had backed his recommendation. I was out. Samuel briefed me on the severance package, 3 months' salary, and nearly 30 days of accrued leave, totaling around $800,000. However, my reputation was in shambles, and my job prospects were bleak. By 2 p.m., I had signed the necessary forms, converted my 401k to an IRA, and returned my company materials, including my laptop. I stepped outside, feeling hollow, and rushed to catch a cab, battling thoughts of failing on the street. Back at the hotel, I poured a mini whiskey with 7-Up over ice, an indulgence, but I needed it. I pondered my situation. At 42, I felt too young to retire, yet uncertain about starting over. I realized I needed to take a chance. I bought a new laptop with Windows 11 and set up programs to track my trades. I accessed my savings account, which had $50,000, and my investment accounts had $250,000, but required a 24-hour notice for withdrawal. After selling some blue-chip shares, I estimated that with my severance, I would have over $1.2 million, which I planned to transfer to an offshore trading account, Blue Sky International. By the time I finished, it was after 9 p.m. I ordered a burger and beer from room service and hesitated to turn on my phone, which had been off for over 36 hours. I was too mentally drained to face any messages, so I lay on the bed, channel surfing for news on the markets, but found nothing of interest. Whiskey, beer, burger, jet lag hit, and I passed out. The next morning, still adjusting, I went for an early breakfast and checked my phone. It was flooded with messages. "Help, Dad, Mom's having a meltdown," from Dean and Katie. "What's going on with Jean?" from my father. "Happy birthday, why aren't you answering?" from Jean's parents. Birthday wishes from the kids, my dad, my sister Georgia, and the Singapore team. Dean also left voicemails about Jean crying but calming down. Jean herself didn't send any messages. No birthday wishes, no explanations. I flew to Springfield, Ubered home, and found chaos. Mess everywhere, unwashed dishes, a full trash bin, and a laundry pile-up. I cleaned the house and tackled the bedrooms, replacing sheets and organizing. It took 3 hours to get things under control. Finally, I checked my laptop. Southeast Asia Aquaculture, SEA, had dropped to $9.37. I was waiting for my funds to clear so I could invest. I called my dad. He said Jean had seemed sad and heartbroken for 2 weeks, but there was no clear reason. I checked our banking transactions. Nothing unusual. Same with the home phone messages. After folding laundry, I decided to cook. I reconnected the battery to my Audi, hit the store, and grabbed groceries for a Thai green curry with jasmine rice. I garnished the dish with spring onions, fresh herbs, and set the table, pouring myself a beer. Halfway through my drink, Jean's car pulled up. The kids ran in, excited to see me. I hugged them, kissed them, and told them how much I missed them. Katie sobbed in my arms, shaking, while Dean kept it together, trying to act more grown up. We stayed in that moment for a while until I noticed Jean watching us with a wistful expression, tears in her eyes. She moved in and kissed me gently, saying, "Welcome home, Adam." Her tone lacked enthusiasm, reflecting a sadness I couldn't ignore. The kids clung to me, and I shared that I was making Thai green curry. Dean expressed curiosity while Katie hugged me tightly. Jean instructed them to clean up and get ready for supper, then gave me a gentle hug, remarking that I looked wiped out and asking why I was back early. I revealed that I had been fired, and she reacted with shock, struggling to find the right words. We briefly discussed work, and she mentioned changes at her job, but I sensed there was more beneath the surface. Just then, the kids came running down, eager to be with me again. At the dinner table, I served the meal, pouring a cool California White for Jean and myself while Dean opted for Mountain Dew, and Katie chose water. For the first time in 4 months, we sat down together as a family. I shared stories about my time in Singapore, recounting the fun team-building activities like dragon boat races and combat archery, which brought smiles to the kids' faces. After finishing dinner, Dean and Katie returned with a wrapped present, excitedly wishing me a happy birthday. Jean's expression changed to shock as she realized she had forgotten. I was tempted to remind her of the gold and diamond earrings I had given her, but I focused on the kids instead. Inside the box was a DVD collection of Band of Brothers, a show I loved. I kissed my children, sharing in the joy of the moment. Jean, embarrassed, promised to get me a present the next day, but I waved it off, saying being home with my family was enough. Dean and Katie hugged me, expressing their love. We spent over an hour chatting before the kids went to do their homework, and Jean and I started cleaning up. I noticed something was off with her and asked what was going on. She admitted feeling depressed, stating that my frequent absences had made her feel lost and disconnected from our life together. I pulled her into a hug, and she initially resisted, but then let me hold her as she cried softly against my chest. I wanted to comfort her more, but she seemed to need just the embrace. I reflected on the past 6 years of my management role, where I had become a troubleshooter for young teams. We had agreed to make sacrifices for a future of leisure and travel once I turned 50, but it felt like we were losing touch in the meantime. Jean gently disengaged from our embrace and suggested I spend time with the kids. I started with Katie, reviewing her homework before putting her to bed with a kiss. When I went to Dean, he expressed concern about Jean, noting she had been crying and forgetting things, including my birthday. Tears welled in his eyes as he asked me to fix it, leaving me nodding uncertainly, unsure of how to help. As I headed downstairs, I heard Jean talking softly on the phone. She hung up as I entered the room, claiming it was just a colleague from the office. We exchanged glances, but she remained guarded, revealing nothing about what troubled her. I sensed a deeper issue and felt the jet lag creeping back, but there was still much to do. By 9:30, I checked the Singapore Stock Exchange. CA was trading at $9.90, showing some recovery. Afterward, I waited for John to finish in the bathroom. She entered wearing an oversized t-shirt, and after brushing my teeth and rinsing, I climbed into bed. When I reached for her, she initially stiffened, but then curled into me, whispering for me to hold her. As I held her, I felt something was deeply wrong. Had my absence been too much for her? I worried she might have fallen out of love, or worse, that she was hiding an illness. My mind raced with unanswerable questions until exhaustion from the jet lag took over, leading me into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of chasing a nameless shadow. I woke up at 4:30 still feeling tired, so I went for a run and decided to get melatonin to adjust to Central Time. After running for an hour, I returned to find Jean gone, leaving a note asking me to give the kids breakfast and take them to school. I checked my bank account, saw the money from JP Morgan had cleared, and transferred it offshore. CA shares were down to $8.99, not free-falling, but steadily declining. I felt torn between fixing my marriage or my finances. I spent time with Dean and Katie, asking about what they'd been doing. They mentioned activities with Mom's boss, Anthony Miller, and his daughter, Evelyn. Dean quickly assured me Evelyn was always present. I smiled, telling them we'd go on vacation now that I was back. After dropping them at school, I called a few friends and then phoned George Tallis, my old mentor. We discussed my credentials and the CA prospectus, agreeing to meet later. On my way to my first meeting, I picked up melatonin from the pharmacy when I saw Jean and Evelyn Miller leaving St. John's Hospital, looking devastated, clinging to each other. They seemed deeply connected by sorrow, but not physically ill. I wondered if it was a shared lover or something more than just a friendship, leaving me questioning what was really going on. Whatever the situation was, they clearly shared a deep connection. I couldn't quite figure it out, but pushed those thoughts aside to focus on my meetings. I pitched the CA shares and didn't hold back, even mentioning my firing. Julian Knowles said he'd consult with his investment club, while Aaron Goldstein, a wealthy retailer, immediately liked the idea and agreed to invest $10 million once the paperwork was sorted. Later, George called, saying his group of investors was interested. We settled on a commission structure based on returns. I then spoke with my dad, who wanted to invest $100,000 and would transfer the funds the next day. We discussed Jean's strange behavior, and he noted that it seemed like she was mourning. That idea stuck with me as we ended the call. Before hanging up, my dad also recommended a private investigator he'd used before, suggesting I get answers. I spent the rest of the day on calls with contacts in Singapore and Southeast Asia, updating my risk profile on CA. The project was still solid, and the management team had their own money invested, which reassured me. It was a green light, and I was ready to start trading when the market opened. In the meantime, I reached out to the private investigator, Clarence Williams, who my dad recommended. He had a slow southern drawl, but I could tell he was sharp. After asking for a $5,000 advance, he said he'd begin investigating the next day, out of respect for all the business my dad had sent him in the past. With everything set, I paced around, drinking coffee, and trying to burn off my nervous energy. Dean and Katie came home late from sports practice, and I spent some time with them, explaining I had a major deal in the works. Jean arrived looking tired but more purposeful than the night before. She brought Chinese food and handed me a small birthday gift, Hugo Boss aftershave with a generic card that read, "Happy birthday, Adam. Lots of love, Jean." The gesture felt impersonal, like I was just a distant relative. We ate dinner as a family. Dean and Katie chatted about their day while Jean remained mostly quiet. Dean complained about the local skateboard park closing, and Katie mentioned that Mr. Miller, Jean's boss, was converting a property into a shelter for offended teenagers. Surprised, I turned to Jean for more details. She admitted she had mentioned it, but offered little information, saying Tony wanted to create a legacy project. I pressed her on why this was happening now, sensing she was holding something back. She snapped slightly, saying it was a much-needed cause, but there was more to her reaction than she was letting on. After the kids left the table, I asked again why this was happening now. Jean's face went blank and she gave a vague answer about the opportunity presenting itself. She was clearly hiding something, and while I kept a pleasant expression, it was obvious she wasn't being truthful. There was more to the story, and it felt personal. I helped clean up, took out the garbage, and told Jean I was heading to my study to work. With an hour before trading opened in Singapore, I sat down and reflected on my marriage, trying to stay rational, despite the deep pain threatening to overwhelm me. I wondered how we had ended up here. In the past, Jean and I were compatible in almost every way: where to live, how to spend money, vacations, kids. Even our bed life was good, despite my frequent travels. We usually planned for my return, turning it into a mini honeymoon, but not this time. Clearly, we were no longer on the same page, and it pissed me off. In Singapore, I was constantly hit on, at the office, on the subway, in markets, bars, and clubs. Many of my colleagues engaged with local women, often treating them as live-in maids with benefits, which I found exploitative. I turned down advances 10 times a week because I was married to a woman I loved. Now, Jean's recent behavior made me question if she still felt the same way. I tried to think of any warning signs, but apart from a recent communication breakdown, I couldn't pinpoint anything. There was a lot to process, but for now, I had to focus on my work. When the Singapore market opened, CA was trading at $8.49. I entered cautiously, knowing any large purchase would impact the market. With over $30 million to invest from my contacts in George's, I started with a $5 million buy. This triggered a flood of shares hitting the market, as investors tried to sell and cut losses. I suspected it was my old colleagues, instructed by head office. I continued buying in $5 million increments as the price kept dropping. Short sellers were pushing it down, hoping to buy back cheaper. The price bottomed at $5.61, and I made a final $15 million purchase. We now owned over 10% of the company, enough to get a board seat if we held on. I called George to celebrate, each of us enjoying a drink, me with Canadian whiskey, him with bourbon. By the end of the session, our buying sparked a rally, and the stock climbed to $8.72. Short sellers were in trouble. Exhausted, I went to bed at 2 a.m., forgetting my melatonin. I woke late the next morning, joining the family as they finished breakfast. Jean was on the phone, talking about something urgent. She asked if my trading went well, and I responded vaguely, not revealing that everything but our house was tied up in CA. Jean took the kids to school, and I checked the share price. It had closed at $10.14. The short sellers had lost big, and the stock was stabilizing. I spent the rest of the morning emailing our investors and catching up on business. Then I explored the Miller Real Estate website, which highlighted their New Horizons home program for troubled teens. They claimed to provide housing, meals, and support to help teens get off the streets and back on track. I didn't find much more on the Miller Real Estate website, so I checked Anthony Miller's Facebook. His page was full of vacation photos, cars, and social events. A recent company group photo caught my eye. Anthony was flanked by his daughter Evelyn and Jean. Anthony looked noticeably thinner and older, and Jean was holding his arm, gazing at him instead of the camera. I looked at Jean's Facebook, which had mostly old family pictures, with nothing new of us together in over 2 years. Evelyn's Facebook featured more photos with Jean, but nothing suspicious, just cryptic posts about the meaning of life and hoping for positive outcomes. I spoke with Clarence Williams again, urging him to fast-track the investigation. He said he'd try, but warned these things take time. I also called my dad, who advised me not to jump to conclusions and to let the experts handle it. I was torn. Should I reach out to Jean to fix things? Or would that make things worse if I found out later I was being deceived? I contacted a lawyer who suggested it's better to fix the marriage than go through a divorce, as no one truly wins in such cases. Finally, I decided to play one last card. I reached out to one of Jean's former colleagues who owed me a favor. He had worked at MRE 6 months ago and agreed to meet me for lunch to share any insights. We met at Red Robin for burgers and a chat. Chad walked in looking like a classic realtor in a company golf shirt, chinos, and Dockers, sunglasses on his head. After some small talk over burgers, I got to the point. He chuckled, realizing I was fishing for information, and asked why. I kept it vague, explaining I had concerns about MRE. He got serious, mentioning that after Tony's wife, Dot, died of cancer, Tony lost his drive for a while. His daughter Evelyn took over, and eventually, Tony regained his focus. Chad then mentioned that Jean and Tony had grown quite close, and she was sometimes referred to as his office wife. He assured me he hadn't seen anything inappropriate, but acknowledged that office gossip can be cruel. Chad also reminded me that I had been away a lot, which could have contributed to their closeness. As he was leaving, Chad casually dropped a bomb. There were rumors that Anthony had been diagnosed with cancer. After he left, I called St. John's Hospital and found out Tony was in a private room in the oncology ward. I paid for lunch and headed home with a lot on my mind. That evening unfolded similarly to the previous ones. After cleaning up, I went outside with a whiskey and cheroot, enjoying the quiet neighborhood. Jean joined me with a glass of wine and confronted me about visiting the MRE website, revealing that they must have tracked visitor data. She questioned why I had been snooping, suggesting I had also checked social media pages. Her tone was accusatory, hinting she was ready for a fight. I kept my poker face, letting her words bounce off. She pressed further, mentioning that Evelyn knew I had accessed her Instagram. Jean was emotional, spilling some wine as she waved off my cheroot smoke. She began crying, but instead of comforting her as I usually would, I remained detached. Her tears seemed more performative than genuine. She insisted I was upsetting her, and when I questioned who she really was, she could only say she was my wife. I doubted her sincerity, leaving her speechless before walking away as she ran inside. I finished my drink and headed to my study. CA shares were rallying and had reached nearly $12, signaling a positive trend. George and I agreed this was not a fluke. As I monitored the market, I noticed some profit-taking, though CA was still far from its original listing price. A message from a JP Morgan contact revealed they had managed to offload some stock at a loss, but were holding out for better prices under orders from my old boss, Joe Rutledge. We both laughed at the irony, as it seemed Rutledge might be on the way out while I was proving my worth. That night, I slept on the pull-out bed in my study, avoiding Jean entirely. The next morning, I checked the closing prices on SGX and was pleased to see that CA had climbed to over $13, as predicted. Our investment crowd had doubled their money, and if we could hit the $25 target, we stood to make over 300% profit. I made breakfast, called the kids down, and ignored Jean throughout the morning. After dropping the kids off at school, I went to the gym, had a late breakfast at IHOP, and made some calls before returning home. I spent 2 hours on a virtual meeting with George, discussing the idea of combining our brokerages with offices in Springfield and Chicago. We agreed to move forward with the idea, and I focused on developing a go-to-market plan for the rest of the day. Late in the afternoon, John returned home alone. She told me the kids were spending the night at the Beckers and that we needed to talk. She poured me a bourbon and herself a glass of wine as we sat in the living room. I remained silent, waiting for her to speak first. Eventually, she became agitated and launched into her explanation, saying she didn't know what I thought she'd been doing while I was away, but that my behavior had been disrespectful and cold. She apologized, claiming she felt like we had become strangers due to my time away. She sniffled, saying she had been under a lot of pressure, but insisted that our marriage was all that mattered. After her emotional outburst, she excused herself, and I sat there sipping my drink, wondering if she was losing touch with reality. I heard her on the phone and later the bath running. When she finally came back downstairs, she was dressed in a gray knit dress and black pumps, wearing the pearls I had bought her years ago. She looked stunning for her age, even more attractive than women a decade younger. She urged me to shower and get dressed, saying she'd book a table at Chesapeake Seafood Restaurant. I got ready quickly, ignoring the urge to confront Jean as she seemed to be on the phone again. We Ubered to the restaurant, where she started with a gin and tonic, while I opted for a Singapore gin sling. At dinner, we stuck to casual conversation about the kids and friends, with Jean showing little concern about my job loss. She reassured me, confident that I'd find work soon, unaware that everything depended on my risky bet on CA. The evening continued smoothly as we discussed everyday matters, avoiding any talk about MRE. For mains, I had the captain's platter, and she ordered lobster. She kept the wine flowing, making me wonder if her goal was to get me drunk. Yet, she remained attentive and affectionate, caressing my hand and looking into my eyes. After dinner, she suggested we head to the gin mill to try artisanal gins. The bar was crowded, but we managed to order Negronis. Pressed close, she kissed me passionately, running her tongue across my lips. Soon we left, Jean dragging me out. In the taxi, she kissed me intensely, her hand inside my pants, keeping me hard but stopping short of making me finish. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon, put on sweatpants, and went downstairs. Jean was making breakfast and greeted me with a kiss, teasing me about last night's intense act, joking that she should ration me more often. We laughed and shared breakfast while she mentioned chores around the house and yard. Afterward, she left to pick up Dean and Katie. I was in the backyard cleaning up when my phone rang. It was Clarence Williams. "Can you talk?" he asked, and in that moment, everything fell apart. I met Clarence Williams at a downtown coffee shop, expecting someone more like the detectives from TV shows. Instead, he was an unassuming small man, dressed in simple clothes and looking entirely ordinary. His appearance seemed designed to be forgettable, though his strong handshake and high-end phone hinted at more than met the eye. Clarence got straight to the point. He hadn't caught my wife Jean in any overtly incriminating situations. No hotel meetups, secret rendezvous, or physical acts of infidelity. However, he had gathered enough evidence through corroborated testimony to confirm that Jean had been having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller, for at least 2 years. The affair was apparently common knowledge at the office, with Miller's daughter Evelyn not only aware but actively helping them meet in secret. Clarence detailed how Jean would often spend weekends at Miller's house when I was away, sending the kids to stay with friends. His bluntness hit me hard. It's one thing to suspect infidelity, but hearing it confirmed by someone else felt like a punch to the gut. My body tensed, my hands gripping the table as my mind raced with anger. Every instinct screamed to confront Jean, but I restrained myself, knowing society doesn't condone retaliation, no matter how betrayed I felt. Clarence continued speaking, though I barely heard him over the pounding in my ears. Eventually, he added another blow. Anthony Miller had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer and only had a few months left to live. The information hit like a final twist of the knife, leaving me struggling to process it all. Clarence's confirmation matched what Chad had hinted at, but now I knew the affair was not only serious, but terminal due to Anthony's illness. Jean's strange behavior suddenly made sense. She was grieving for the man she truly loved, trying to cope with his approaching death. I explained all of this to Clarence, not because I trusted him as a confidant, but simply because I needed to talk to someone. Clarence's response revealed his insight into these situations. He explained that cheating isn't just about act, but emotional investment. Cheaters often justify their actions by claiming it's more than physical. There are feelings involved. Over time, these relationships develop like any marriage, with shared conversations, private moments, and dreams. They find faults in their spouses to justify their behavior and indulge in the fantasy of a life without the burdens of marriage. This hurt more than imagining them meeting just for act. Jean had given this man her best self, free from the responsibilities and routines of marriage. He offered her only good times, without the everyday struggles that come with raising kids and running a household. It was a relationship built on escape and fantasy, while I was left with the reality of our marriage. After a brief conversation, we agreed to pause the investigation while I processed everything. One thing was clear: my marriage was over. Staying together for the kids was no longer an option. Though the thought of being separated from them was painful, I knew that many children lived in divorced households. My family would now be part of that statistic. I sipped my cooling coffee, feeling the intense pain take over every part of me. I knew I wanted to hurt John and Miller in return, but I had to calm my emotions. Thinking this way wouldn't help. My mind wandered to my time in the Far East, where CEOs approached life and business with long-term strategies, similar to Southern Europeans who wouldn't stop until they destroyed their enemies completely. But I wasn't in the mafia or some triad. I was just an ordinary man living an average life with no special power or influential ally to help me. I realized I was in this alone. I ordered more coffee, contemplating how to exact revenge on a dying man. Jean was easier. I'd take away everything she held dear, though the logistics of that were still forming in my mind. My immediate problem was Miller. He hadn't promised me anything, but he knew Jean was married and disrespected me by pursuing her. My anger flared again. I'd always been a risk-taker, and once I set my mind on something, I was immovable. That stubbornness now drove my desire for revenge, no matter the fallout, even if it crushed me in the process. A plan began to form. I called Clarence and asked him to dig into the troubled women the Millers had helped through their program. It wasn't fully formed yet, just another attempt to find something useful, like casting a wide net. I remembered a lesson from a fishing trip in Kenya. You don't fish for marlin directly. First, you catch smaller fish, then use them as live bait to lure in the bigger catch. On that trip, I successfully caught a marlin, though I felt a deep sadness watching the fish fight for its life. I vowed never to participate in big game fishing again. However, the lesson in catching the marlin inspired a plan. I drove home, practicing breathing exercises to maintain my composure and act as if I was still in the good mood from the previous night's lovemaking. When Jean arrived home later with Dean and Katie, we grilled steaks, corn, and shared a family meal. I played the role of a loving father and husband, masking the inner cynic. While I genuinely enjoyed my time with Dean and Katie, my interactions with Jean felt like a B-grade movie. She was buying into it, seemingly worried I'd put things together, treating me as her fallback plan as her lover was dying. The cynical part of me recognized this dynamic and stored it away for future encounters after the divorce. The following days felt surreal, as I lived out the lie while watching myself act the part I'd chosen. I wondered if actors experienced the same detachment when watching themselves on screen. On a brighter note, George and I finalized our new trading entity in Singapore, transferring the CA stock portfolio. The stock had surged to $16 and climbing, more than doubling our investment. My growing paranoia led me to increase security measures. I added fingerprint access, encrypted files, and wiped my phone, reloading only what I needed. I was becoming more cautious, ensuring nothing could be easily traced or compromised. After that, my focus shifted to exploring potential share listings and reaching out to JP Morgan contacts, laying the groundwork for future business. The non-compete clause wasn't much of a concern since being fired mostly nullified it. On the marriage front, things had quieted while I waited for more evidence, which arrived Thursday on a thumb drive from Clarence. Paranoia made me choose a new coffee shop for the exchange. The drive contained information on 14 women Miller had helped, 5 of whom still lived locally. One had become a full-time escort, indicating Miller's intervention hadn't worked for her. I bought a burner phone and contacted her. She agreed to meet at a motel for $100 an hour, and I had to pay for the room. Layla, a small tattooed woman, arrived on time and quickly offered her services. I stopped her, offering $1,000 for information instead. At first, she hesitated, thinking I was after something inappropriate, but I reassured her I only wanted details about her time at the home for abused women. After some hesitation, Layla eventually opened up. She shared her story. After finishing school, she left home because she couldn't stand her stepdad. Life on the streets quickly spiraled downward, leading her to sell herself just for food and shelter. Drugs soon followed, and she ended up working as a prostitute. One night, a client became violent, beating her when she refused to comply with his demands and dumping her on the street. Bystanders found her and called the police, who took her to the hospital. That's when Mrs. Miller got involved, offering her a place at the shelter after her discharge. Layla stayed at the shelter for about 6 months, but eventually left due to the restrictive rules. As she finished her story, we sat in silence. Her tale, though tragic, was all too common. I wrestled with guilt, wondering if my pursuit of revenge would make me just another offender. But my need for payback overpowered everything else. I asked her if the offense at the home started right away or came later. She hesitated, confused, before realizing what I was getting at. After some thought, she started negotiating, understanding my motives. She asked for $20,000, knowing I wanted to ruin Miller's life for ruining my marriage. Her boldness surprised me, but I saw potential in her plan. She promised to use the Me Too movement to her advantage and expose Miller. We discussed logistics. She wanted the money to start over and leave the life she was trapped in for the sake of her young daughter. I offered to help her secure a legitimate job in Chicago if things worked out, and her cautious hope turned to excitement. We exchanged contact information, and I gave her my burner number under the name Jerry. She offered a quick service given the time left, but I declined. With that, phase 1 was complete. At home, I maintained my internal conflict while outwardly playing the devoted husband, and Jean seemed to believe it. She was too absorbed in Miller's legacy project to notice anything unusual. I positioned myself strategically to gather information on the project's progress without raising her suspicions. We cooked and ate together like we used to, but I saw her differently now. I had closeness with her often, treating her like a means to an end. She might have thought we were making love, but to me, she was no different from Layla. Just more attractive. I took control, not caring about her pleasure. I made her give me BJ every other morning and never returned the favor. I felt justified, considering the cost of the upcoming divorce. And I was getting what I could while I still could. Oddly, instead of being upset, Jean seemed to embrace my new attitude. By Friday, she was giving me morning BJ without prompting. It was clear she was either enjoying the change, accustomed to more closeness from both Miller and me, or trying to solidify her position as my wife before her lover passed. Maybe it was a combination of all three. Over breakfast, John mentioned she'd be busy setting up for the New Horizons home unveiling on Monday. I already knew the details from their website and social media. The mayor was attending along with local media and CBS. She made a comment about Miller being well enough to attend, which stirred something in me. The divorce papers were ready, waiting for my signal to be served. With Illinois being a no-fault state, irreconcilable differences would be the official reason. As I started my day on SGX, I was pleased to see our shares climbing, a small but positive start to Friday. I tuned into WMA for Evelyn's 9:30 interview, where she discussed MRE's social responsibility program and her father's involvement in the New Horizons home project. She spoke warmly about how the program began with her mother and was continued by her father, now expanding into a fully funded community initiative. The host was enthusiastic and callers praised the program, pledging donations. Everything seemed positive until one caller disrupted the narrative. A hesitant voice on the line, breaking with sobs, urged listeners not to believe in the home's success, claiming it had allowed Mr. Miller to exploit the women there. She identified herself as Layla and accused Anthony Miller of ruining her life, leaving her on the streets as a prostitute. Evelyn, shocked and defensive, denied the allegations, insisting her father was a good man. The station quickly went to a break, and when they returned, the host struggled to regain control. Evelyn tried to defend her father, clearly believing in his innocence. Meanwhile, the phone lines lit up with mixed reactions. Some supported Layla, while others doubted her story, calling her a liar. The emotional intensity of the situation had turned what was meant to be a feel-good interview into a public controversy, with listeners passionately debating the truth. The chaos intensified when a woman named Rita called in, claiming Anthony Miller had assaulted her too. This sparked a flood of calls and social media posts, with more women coming forward, some sharing detailed abuse stories. The situation quickly escalated into a viral movement, making it hard to distinguish truth from exaggeration. I reached out to my old friend Vicky, worried about my wife's involvement with MRE. She agreed this could be a massive scandal if true. By lunchtime, radio stations fell silent, but social media erupted. Initially divided, public opinion soon turned against Miller, with countless women sharing their experiences. Feeling overwhelmed, I shut everything off, took Tylenol, and retreated to the shower. The weight of the day broke me down, and I cried harder than I had in years, realizing I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Nietzsche's warning about becoming the monster you fight described me perfectly. Miller had wronged me, but in seeking revenge, I had unleashed a storm beyond my control. All I could do was hang on and hope. I picked up Dean and Katie, then made chicken stir-fry for dinner. Jean was absent, her phone off. We waited, ate, and played a board game without her. By 10, she finally came home looking utterly devastated, her makeup smudged, hair disheveled, and the weight of the day's events heavy on her. She collapsed into a chair, shaken by the accusations against Miller. I handed her a drink and calmly pointed out that where there's smoke, there's usually fire. She refused to believe Miller could be guilty, insisting he was a good man. I began phase 2 of my plan. I reminded Jean that, as her husband, we knew everything about each other. But how could she really know Miller? He was just her boss. She clung to her belief in his goodness, but I pushed harder, suggesting there were things she couldn't possibly know about him. Doubt flickered in her expression as I continued to plant seeds of suspicion. Jean gasped in shock, turning pale as she asked if Miller had ever tried anything with me. I denied it, watching as she dissolved into tears, staring into her empty glass. Without finding any answers, she wearily headed upstairs, briefly greeting the kids before disappearing into the shower. Pretending to be half asleep, I listened as she made calls downstairs, first to Evelyn, repeatedly calling the situation a nightmare and questioning why multiple women would accuse Miller. Then she made a call to Tony, assuring him it was a misunderstanding before ending with, "I love you too." By the time she returned to bed, I was genuinely asleep. The next morning, I made breakfast and took Dean and Katie to their practice. Vicky called, informing me that 4 women had come forward, and the mayor's office, along with various civic groups, was distancing themselves from the project. The Attorney General had even announced an investigation. When I returned home, Jean was gone. With the SGX closed, I had little to do. I called George about business and spoke to my dad about my broken marriage. He sadly agreed it was beyond repair, feeling bad for Dean and Katie, but knowing they would join the many kids in the U.S. dealing with separated parents. I called Jean, who was with Evelyn and the company lawyers trying to fight the allegations. I warned her about the potential fallout, but she stayed involved. Despite their efforts, things worsened. That weekend, MRE's busiest days saw a massive drop in visitors, and by Monday, cancellations flooded in. The opening of the New Horizons home was postponed due to the bad press. On Monday, another woman came forward through a newspaper ad, accusing Miller of assault during her brief stay at the home for troubled teens. She encouraged others to join a class action lawsuit. By the week's end, 5 key things happened. Miller, after being questioned by the DA, worsened in health. 3 women gave detailed assault statements to the police, and the media storm forced MRE to shut down indefinitely. Jean confided in me nightly about how hard Evelyn was struggling to keep MRE afloat as salespeople left, taking clients with them. Meanwhile, CA surpassed the $24 mark, and I began selling shares in small blocks, making back our investment while still holding 2/3 of the stock. Financially, things were great. That weekend, my dad took Dean and Katie, and I returned home with a bottle of vintage Veuve Clicquot, ready to celebrate. When I arrived, I found a BMW SUV with MRE branding in the driveway. Inside, Jean was crying, and Evelyn was comforting her. I greeted them, uncorked the champagne, and poured 3 glasses. In their shock, they accepted the drinks. Jean then confronted me about the divorce papers she found, and Evelyn questioned my love for Jean. I coldly explained that I had stopped caring the moment Jean became involved with her father. I toasted to the downfall of MRE and threw my glass across the room. Evelyn, angry, seemed ready to attack, but I warned her not to try, leaving her terrified. Turning to Jean, I told her to get a lawyer and that the kids would stay with my father until custody was decided. Her shock at my behavior was evident, but I made it clear that all our recent intimacy was nothing more than me taking what I felt she owed me. I poured another drink while the 2 women sat speechless. Evelyn dropped her glass, spilling champagne on the rug. Jean broke hers, cutting her finger and sucking the blood. Both looked at me with fear, as if I were a madman. I sarcastically offered more champagne, knowing there would be no takers. Jean attempted to justify her actions, blaming my absence for her loneliness, but couldn't meet my eyes. I coldly replied, mocking her need for Miller. Evelyn tried to defend her father by accusing me of infidelity, but I shot back, pointing out that not all men were like her father, who preyed on vulnerable women and ruined marriages. I leaned into Evelyn, daring her to challenge me, but she knew better. I continued, condemning her father as a predator who would die a disgrace. His legacy project would fail, his money would be seized for future claims, and MRE would go bankrupt. I warned her that she would have to escape far away, carrying the shame of her father's actions and her own role in it. Evelyn was trembling and crying under my verbal attack, likely wishing she could hit me. I wished the same so I could unleash the anger I had held back for weeks. I compared her actions to Ghislaine Maxwell's role in grooming girls for Jeffrey Epstein, causing her to shake her head in fear and denial, insisting her father was a good man. I turned to Jean, giving her 2 hours to pack her things and leave. If she stayed, I threatened to call the press and expose her involvement. Furious, she cursed at me, but said she'd get a lawyer to fight for what she wanted. I repeated my warning. 2 hours. Leaving the house, the adrenaline finally hit, and I began hyperventilating, shaking uncontrollably for about 15 minutes. Once I regained control, I called my dad, instructing him to keep Dean and Katie and not let Jean be alone with them. Afterward, I drove aimlessly, eventually filling up my car and returning home late, surprised by how far I had driven. The house felt empty, like a mausoleum filled with memories of better times. I couldn't sleep, haunted by thoughts of what I had set in motion. Socrates once said that an unexamined life isn't worth living, but I avoided examining my own too deeply, especially now. It had gone too far to stop, and I worried it might unravel in court, potentially implicating me. I decided to get Layla out of town to minimize the risk. After a restless night, I called the kids, sensing Dean was already suspicious. I also reached out to Layla, who confirmed she'd leave for Chicago the next day, with $25,000 already in her account. George had arranged a job for her in property management. Later, Vicky called to tell me 3 of the women were suing Miller for damages, with papers being served Monday. We discussed how the situation had escalated, comparing it to the Harvey Weinstein case. That Saturday, I spent time with Dean and Katie, explaining that their mom and I were divorcing because of her affair with Miller. Katie cried, and Dean took it stoically. We spent the rest of the day at the driving range and had dinner together before heading home. On Sunday, I received calls from Jean's parents, asking if there was hope for reconciliation for the kids' sake, but I knew there wasn't. How can I reconcile with someone who's had an affair for years, especially with a man who's a predator? I told Jean's parents. They were shocked, unaware of the scandal in Illinois. I assured them the truth would come out in court and ended the call, hoping their image of Jean was shattered. Life moved slowly after that. Dean and Katie were back home, and my dad moved in to help. Business with George picked up, and we received glowing referrals. 2 weeks later, Vicky informed me that a 4th woman had joined the lawsuit against Miller, though, strangely, Layla hadn't. I had a meeting with Jean's lawyers to discuss the division of assets. I protected Dean and Katie's education funds and had already moved my final payouts offshore. Jean claimed we should have more cash, but I insisted it was lost in bad investments. When she called my bluff, I warned her that if she didn't accept the deal, I'd fight for the house and drain her financially. Jean alternated between anger, regret, and trying to blame me for her actions. At one point, she even suggested we try to work things out, but quickly shifted back to threatening to take me for everything. The battle dragged on for months, but I held most of the cards, fueled by righteous anger. At another meeting, when I refused to budge, Jean's lawyer threatened to get her back into the house immediately. I responded with a grin, warning Jean to tread carefully or I'd expose her complicity in a violent criminal gang. She turned pale, resembling someone in shock. "Try me," I said, "and see what happens next." As I left the office, I saw Evelyn in the foyer glaring at me. I smiled at her with the confidence of someone who had already won, and her smirk quickly faded. "You should have stayed out of it, Evelyn," I told her. "Now you'll face the consequences." 2 days later, I paid Layla another $5,000, and social media exploded with accusations that Evelyn had helped her father, Anthony Miller, recruit women for trafficking. The public outrage was swift, likening Evelyn to Ghislaine Maxwell. The DA's office faced backlash for not arresting either of them. Evelyn became a target, and the pressure mounted. Meanwhile, Miller was sued by the 4 women who had come forward. I began losing sleep, realizing that if this went to court, it could unravel everything and backfire on me. 6 weeks after my return from Singapore, I was working from home when the doorbell rang. It was Evelyn. She wanted to talk, but I wasn't in the mood to play nice. I refused at first, accusing her of trying to trap me into saying something she could use against me. She pleaded, and I eventually agreed, on the condition that she leave her phone and handbag in her car. After ensuring she wasn't recording anything, I let her in and made her sit across from me. Evelyn started by saying she thought I was a nice guy and begged me to stop what I had set in motion. She claimed the accusations against her father were lies and needed to be retracted, but I remained unmoved. I reminded her that it was now in the hands of the courts and mocked her for expecting help after her father had an affair with my wife. She was clearly defeated, tears streaming down her face as she asked when I would be satisfied. I made it clear there would be no peace until her family was completely destroyed. There was no stopping, no truce. The Millers would be utterly ruined, and that was the only outcome I sought. Evelyn realized the truth of my words but still tried one last time, offering herself to me as revenge, suggesting I make her my whore. I considered her, unmarried and recently single, fit and attractive, but instead of taking her up on the offer, I taunted her cruelly, asking if she wanted me to humiliate her in front of her father and Jean. She turned pale, called me a pig, and stormed out. I grabbed her arms, reminding her that I wasn't a predator like her father. Shaken, she fled to her car, driving off erratically. I felt both satisfaction at hurting her and disgust at my own brutality. The rest of the week was filled with meetings with lawyers and business deals. George and I were looking into promising companies on the Hong Kong and Johannesburg stock exchanges. Meanwhile, the class action lawsuit against Miller gained momentum. The Millers, led by Evelyn, were trying to settle out of court while the DA hesitated to prosecute a dying man. A particularly damning revelation came from the accusers when one woman offered to describe Miller's genitals in detail, having been assaulted by him so often. This sealed the case. The Millers were financially ruined, their property sold, and the women received multi-million-dollar settlements. MRE was finished. I visited Miller in the hospital, determined to ensure he knew I was behind his downfall. I entered his room unnoticed and confronted him, telling him I had ruined his life and legacy for what he did with my wife. I asked if it was worth it, leaving him to die knowing he had lost everything. He passed away 2 days later, cremated in a small gathering attended by only 5 people, including Jean. Jean, devastated, confronted me, accusing me of ruining Miller's life. She admitted she loved him, claiming he gave her the attention she needed, unlike me, who always prioritized work and the kids. She said she had felt neglected, but I didn't let her dwell in her memories. Instead, I played a recording of my final conversation with Miller. He had confessed to using women for favors and admitted his guilt, revealing how my actions had unintentionally uncovered his predatory behavior. Miller boasted about taking Jean from me, but I reminded him it had cost him everything. Jean, overwhelmed by the truth, collapsed and went catatonic. I walked away, leaving her to deal with the consequences of her choices. She was no longer my concern. When MRE was offloading assets, I bought the house they intended for the New Horizons home at a great price. I announced through ads and radio that I would turn it into a women-run halfway house for abused women, naming it the Joy Carter Home after my mother. The home was placed in a trust, with my father, myself, and the 4 women who had sued Miller as trustees. They were eager to contribute both time and money to the project, earning praise from the media, though I kept a low profile. This move also worked in my favor during the divorce, helping me secure a deal where Jean got primary custody. I paid child support until the kids turned 18, and Jean stayed in the house while sharing the mortgage. There was no alimony. In one meeting, Jean accused me of hiding money, but I warned her off, and she backed down, clearly afraid of me. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. I bought a condo where Dean and Katie could stay on weekends since Jean worked a lot. I traveled frequently, especially to the Far East, but life wasn't too bad. Jean's relationship with Evelyn collapsed after I played the recording of Miller admitting his assaults, which I distributed widely. Evelyn disappeared after a few months, and I never heard from her again. I met Layla, whose real name was Leanne Roxton, in Chicago. She had cleaned up and was thriving at her job. When I asked her if she knew about the offense, she confirmed it was an open secret, though no one directly admitted it out of fear of being kicked out. She wasn't abused herself, but contacted others and offered them $5,000 to say they were. Rita French, one of them, ended up coming forward on her own, and from there, the Me Too movement took over. Layla reflected that she could have made more money, but by the time the lawsuit hit, she had already moved to Chicago and missed the chance. Despite this, she was grateful for the fresh start I'd given her. My revenge had unfolded better than I expected, and though I kept telling myself I wasn't a monster, I couldn't deny I had destroyed the Millers. Financially, I was doing well, and George even hinted at selling me his share of the business so he could retire. Dean and Katie had adjusted, focused on their own lives. 4 years after the divorce, Jean remarried. I remained single, struggling with trust. After some time, I began seeing a trauma counselor to heal, but I still had a long way to go.